This episode is brought to you by Liquid IV. Looking to stay hydrated through the holidays? Liquid IV has you covered with 3 times the electrolytes of leading sports drinks and 8 vitamins and nutrients. Their hydration multiplier plus energy blends gives you a boost of natural caffeine in delicious flavors like lemon ginger or blackberry peach. Just 1 stick of Liquid IV and 16 ounces of water delivers superior hydration to water alone. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code COMMAND at checkout. Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more.
Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
Welcome back to another episode of the Command Zone podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Weeks.
How is it? It's Josh Lee Kwai.
And today our coverage of Foundations continues. Today we're going to be talking about the cards in the 99. So all of the non-legendary creatures that are worth talking about. As always, we can't cover all of them. We're going to cover the ones that we think you'll see the most and fit into the most like broad strategies.
I got to say, for a set that is sort of ostensibly for newer players, kind of core set-ish. That seems to be the messaging around it and what it's geared for. There's a lot of stuff in here that's pretty relevant, and I think we're going to see, on the battlefield quite often.
Yeah, what I love about this set is it does seem to be like relevant power level, but simple lines of text.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, well, that's cool. I'm going to play that card. A lot, I want to say more than most sets lately. So pretty exciting. Foundation looks very, very cool. Before we get into that, let's talk about our sponsors here, because if you want to pick up any of these Foundation cards, or if you're like me and you're still kind of catching up from the summer, you haven't got everything from Duskborn and Modern Horizons 3 and everything that you've wanted, well, cardkingdom.com/command is the best place to go to get your Magic products, singles, anything at all. They are a huge e-retailer that has a ton of inventory. If you're looking for a specific card in a specific version in a specific condition, they are going to have it. And the great thing about them is they're going to have all the cards in your deck that you need, so you can order them all from one place. Hit that checkout button, and then that one package comes to your doorstep. You just can't beat the convenience of just being able to get that stuff all at once, sleeve it up, and ready to play with your deck that you just built and are excited about right away. Another thing we love about Card Kingdom is that they really take care of you. They are professionals. So if there's any problems, God forbid, but anytime you order from anywhere, once in a while, maybe it's on your part. You added the wrong card or the wrong version or something. They always make it right. That's one of the things I've always loved about them from the beginning is like they work really hard for the customer to make sure they have a really positive experience. And that's what we like about being able to be sponsored by a company that we really stand behind and really order cards from. Like all our Game Nights Live and other events and things that we need cards from here at the Command Zone, we use Card Kingdom legitimately because we can trust them. We know we're going to get the stuff when they say that it's going to come in the condition that they said. And, they're always going to fix it if something goes wrong. So again, cardkingdom.com/command.
And once those cards are in your hand, you're going to need to keep them safe, protected, looking cool. Go to ultrapro.com/command and you can support the show while you're doing so. UltraPro has everything a gamer needs accessory-wise.
Yep.
They've got playmats and deck boxes, binders, sleeves. They've got the officially licensed Magic art. So if you're into one set, go to the UltraPro website and see if they've got your favorite cards on playmats and sleeves. It's really fun to have everything coordinating, and it really feels strong when you have all of the stuff together. Like if you build a cat deck and you've got a cat playmat and a cat deck box and all of that. Love it so much. Plus, if you have a playmat that means something to you, a very special one that maybe you got from an event or one that you got like a Secret Lair based one.
Something signed maybe?
Yeah, you can put it in the premier playmat display product that is new. You can hang that playmat directly on your wall. It's basically like 2 pieces of acrylic that keep it safe and it lets you display it. I know I have a lot of playmats that I love, that I'm like, I love the art and I want it, but I don't bring it to play with because I don't want to get any like food on it or anything like that. So I'm very precious about it, and it's nice to have something to do with it so you can still see it and not get it messy. Pick up some sweet stuff and support the show over at ultrapro.com/command.
Yeah, I love that playmat display thing. Actually, I have a couple of signed playmats from back in like 2015 with like, old signatures from all the creators and stuff back then that I was like, oh, I know exactly what to do with it now. Yeah. Instead of just keeping it rolled up like in my dresser. So
right, yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of UltraPro, we are doing something pretty special right now. We have a Kickstarter we just launched for our new Game Nights themed deck box, which I'm holding right here. previously, a few years ago, we did a deck box Kickstarter, which was our most popular Kickstarter of all time. So this new one has the orange logo, which orange has kind of become our color in the meantime, like our main color. We call it Mythic Orange. So it's got orange stitching. It's got the orange logo. It has a really nice interior lining. This time, because we heard the feedback from last time, we are offering signed versions of the deck box. So if you want Jimmy, Rachel, my signature in the nice silver pen, it looks really, really good on that interior lining. You can get a hold of this deck box by ordering it through our Kickstarter. There'll be a link in the show notes. There's probably a QR code on screen if you're watching on YouTube. And the way Kickstarters work, I think most people know, but they're for a limited run. So just make sure within the next, it's probably a couple of weeks left now, that you get your order in. And I will say we are going to try our best, and we think we're going to be able to do it for the most part, to get everybody their deck boxes by Christmas. To get them shipped out so they'll be in your hand in time for the holidays. So if you want to support game nights, if you want a really good deck box, I mean, these deck boxes literally really good. Jimmy and myself, we've taken like our decks to Amsterdam and to all the Magicons around the world for the last couple of years in these deck boxes, and they just are still as good as new. Like, they really hold up.
They work really well in a backpack, especially if you've traveled with them. You know that deck boxes, if you throw them into a backpack, just stab you in the back, and they're all a mess in there. Yeah. But these stack up really nicely, and they hold up really, really well. High quality stuff. So go to that Kickstarter, pick up the deck box if you're interested in supporting and getting some cool stuff.
And speaking of supporters,
yes,
we call out one lucky patron every single episode. Thanks to all our Patreon supporters. You can go to patreon.com/command zone if you want to support. And this episode is dedicated to Michael D. Bass. Or maybe Bass.
Michael D. Bass.
Probably Bass.
Probably.
Mike,
you rock.
You do. You rock. All right, let's get into the main topic here. Foundations in the 99 analysis. A lot of cool stuff. There's more cards than normal, it feels like, as well.
I mean, there's all of Foundations, which is the main set, and then there's Foundations Jumpstart in addition to that. And that has new cards, and both of them have reprints. And they look like reprint sets, and there's a lot of sweet reprints in them, but they're about, I don't know, this is a guess. It feels like they're about half new cards
50-50,
as well, which is awesome. It means that there's some beloved favorites, like Breema's got a reprint in this one, and some brand new cards that go really well with Breema's.
And you should be able to get your hands on these cards for quite a while, because we know that the Foundation set is going to be legal in standard for longer than the normal period of time.
Yeah.
So this will be in print for a while.
I love this. I hope it's on shelves all year long, and you always have a product you can point new players to be like, hey, you want to get to know Magic? Pick up Foundations. It's great for that. So,
yeah, this set is really good for learning the game or teaching new players for sure.
Yeah.
But I think that would make you think that, like, the cards won't be as powerful, but that is not the case at all. There's a lot of really cool stuff in here.
Yeah, let's get into it. We're going in alphabetical order, as is tradition, starting with Abyssal Harvester. 1 black for a creature demon warlock. He's a 3/2 with an activated ability that says tap, exile target creature card from a graveyard that was put there this turn. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a nightmare in addition to its other types. Then exile all other nightmare tokens you control.
So it basically cheats something out of your graveyard onto the battlefield with a tap ability, and it also has the caveat that thing has to have been put into your graveyard this turn.
Yeah.
Or put into a graveyard this turn.
Graveyard. It doesn't have to be yours. You can steal this from your opponents, but it has to be this turn, which is a pretty serious restriction on a tap ability. It's hard to get that timing lined up, but it goes really well with a lot of stuff that Black is already good at. It's good with self-mill. It's good with General Mills, the cereal. Okay. It's good with discard and sacrifice effects. It's great with Entomb.
Yep.
You can get, there's a lot of different ways that you can control what creature goes into the graveyard when, and this is a great payoff for it. Repeatable, too.
Yeah, repeatable, although it does have that nightmare clause, so you really can only have one token made by this at any given time. There's probably some ways around that if you get really tricky. Probably not worth it for this one card. But yeah, there's a lot of guardrails on this card too.
Yes.
It's a tap ability, so you need to give it haste or, untap with it. It says the only things that went to graveyard this turn thing. And it says, also you can only have one of these nightmares at a time. They were obviously very careful with this card because I think that tells you, though, that the effect is very powerful.
Yes, for sure.
The fact that they kept being like, we got to limit it here. We better limit it over here, too. Oh, let's limit it this way, too.
Yeah, this is very interesting. There's, of course, some ways to abuse it because it's a token. You can populate it. You can do any number of ways to use that tokenness. Of course, once you make a new nightmare, all of that work disappears because it destroys all the other nightmares.
Yep.
And I've seen people talk about using conspiracy. You can turn all of your creatures into not nightmares.
Yeah, there's definitely ways.
There's ways to do that, but you're not putting this in a deck to combine with conspiracy.
Yeah, you're not building around this card because it's one card of the 99, and we always talk about in these episodes. So you would already have to have that set up in a deck that already exists to be able to change creature types and such like that. That's also self-milling or discarding or sacrificing stuff to kind of make this good. Or maybe mass mill would be fine because you might be saying, oh, I'm
General
gonna steal.
mill.
Yeah, general mill. the cereal. Yeah, I mean, I think it's cool. You put graveyard hate down here. I didn't think of it in that way to begin with, but it does have...
It's not great graveyard hate.
Right.
Because, again, the timing is really difficult. It has to enter this turn if you play this after they've entombed something. But it is just incidental graveyard hate, especially when you're milling somebody and you want a lot of graveyard hate in that deck to make sure that you're not just gassing up their deck.
Yeah, you have the ability to be like, okay, let's get rid of that thing. Hopefully it's also something that you want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw on Reddit, I liked this, that somebody called it Scary Artisans.
It has a Fairy Artisans feel about it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. I was thinking about play patterns with this card, and I think it's pretty scary if your opponent plays it. Let's say they play it, on 3, and then on 4, they just pass. Or they, leave some amount of mana up, even if it's just 1 black because of Entomb, and pass. They could have nothing and probably do, but you're not going to be able to necessarily tell the times when they're going to be, on the inside before my turn, entomb something crazy, activate this because that, was put in the graveyard this turn. I don't know, a Tali or something.
Sure.
Boom. I'm untapping on turn 5 with something that is extra scary, and it was hard to predict if I was going to be able to do that based on what you could see.
Right. It is an interesting reanimate effect because you can do it on end step, which gives it that pseudo haste ability.
Yeah.
There's some necromancy has that, and there's some reanimate effects that grant haste, but this one is repeatable and does allow for other manipulations of it, which is interesting.
And a lot of that time in that circumstance, I bet it's going to go to end step. You were like, what are you going to do? And they're going to untap.
Yeah.
Because they don't have those pieces. But how will you know when one's the other?
It does sort of have that thing where it's I think it's a little scarier than it is good.
Yeah.
But it is very good, in a Sidisi self-mill deck. You play this on 3, you untap, you play Sidisi, you mill 3, you use this to reanimate, I don't know, a Ramunap Excavator or a Sakura Tribe-Elder or just some value creature.
Whatever you get, because you mill 3 cards, so you're not going to have a lot of choice. But you get something.
You get something.
Yeah.
And in a self-mill deck, you do that a lot. So I like it. I think of it more of as a value piece rather than a reanimator piece. I think you're going to have to get really, really lucky for this to get a 7-drop.
Right.
But it can do some really powerful stuff, and the fact that it's repeatable means that it's okay if it only reanimates something small.
Yeah. I think it's probably, like you said, looks more scary than it actually is. It's a lot of hoops to jump through, a lot of guardrails on it. I think it's probably not going to do as much as you would hope it would do, but every once in a while it's going to be nuts.
It's going to be really sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. In the right deck, I will be very afraid of the Abyssal Harvester.
Yeah, we added a sort of new category this episode. So what kind of decks want this? And I think that decks that are playing a lot of sort of high CMC creatures that are already self-milling and looting are good candidates. If you have Entomb in your deck, it's a good candidate. But if you, Sidisi's already self-milling all the time and has a lot of high-value creatures. I also thought it could be meta-dependent if you're playing sort of against a lot of decks that are milling those. If you know in your meta, there's always this player that loves the graveyard or whatever. This card becomes a lot better because it's graveyard hate, but also just the chance to they're going to give you something to snag. Yeah. Because they like to play around and put stuff in their graveyard.
It's fun when graveyard hate gives you something back.
Yeah.
Like a little treat for playing your vegetables.
Yeah, it feels bad to just be like, okay, just get rid of some cards of graveyard for no benefit to me just hurts you. It feels a lot better if you're like, I get something for that.
Like a land on Pachuca Bog. Up next is a little less scary. It's Banner of Kinship.
Is it less scary?
It's a 5-mana artifact. It says, as this artifact enters, choose a creature type. This artifact enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of the chosen type. Creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on this artifact.
Super interesting.
Woo! This is a big Anthem effect in the right deck.
Yeah. I mean, it could be huge, and it doesn't even... I mean, if it's 5, it's great, right?
Yeah. If it's 3, it feels pretty good.
Yeah. So
Like, the thing especially in colorless, is the big deal here. A 5-mana colorless artifact. There's a lot of other options in this slot, but none of them are this powerful, and or they're just deeply frustrating.
Right.
Like, this is Coat of Arms is what I'm referring to. Like, Coat of Arms is so powerful, but so annoying that you don't put it in a deck.
it's so hard to keep track of.
This is Coat of Arms simplified and still gives you that powerful boost without helping all of your opponents at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it'll probably play a lot like Coat of Arms in that most of the time you'll probably cast this and then win.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's kind of how Coat of Arms tends to play out, because you don't really want to cast it and then let your opponents get any sort of advantage from it.
Mm-hmm.
And you wouldn't cast in a situation where you only got 2 things, because what good is it doing you?
Yeah.
And you don't want to telegraph that. So this feels like the type of thing where, like, it kind of works like Beastmaster Ascension or something like that, which is good because, green has access to a lot of that, but not every color does.
Mm-hmm.
So just the ability for, like, blue decks to be like, now I have a big Anthem effect for my token deck.
Yeah, for all your Drakes from Talrand.
Yeah, exactly. You go, okay, cool. It is not the easiest in a mono blue deck to be like, how do I convert that into a very quick win?
Yes.
Like, that's not pecking away at you for 3 turns. So the fact that Banner of Kinship is like, cool, boom, everything gets +6, and that's probably enough, right?
That's
like,
probably enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this card over the other options because it follows the play pattern that we expect in Commander, which is make a bunch of stuff, play a benefit from all that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, Door of Destinies is still very common in Kindred decks, and I just don't think it's very good because it's a 4-mana artifact that you enter, you choose a type, and then whenever you cast a spell of that type after this, now you start getting the Anthem effect. But I have to get this 4-mana thing in play first start casting.
It's not an overrun because you can't convert your I have 9 of this thing into a win right now. It's too slow.
It's terrible in the late game, which is when you want your pump effect. So I like that this is what you want Door of Destinies to be at the right time in the game.
Yeah, I think this card is quite good and going to see a lot of play in sort of the non-green, either, typal, or it can just be token decks, because often token decks are like, hey, I'm creating a lot of tokens, but they might be different tokens, but whichever one it is, if it's Saprolings this game, I'll say Saprolings.
Yeah.
And if it's plants, I'll say plants.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be really great in either of those, and hopefully it replaces some of the more less powerful effects that are frustrating to play. Like Eldrazi Monument still gets played a lot, and it's a very small pump effect that gives you flying, I guess.
Well, the Indestructible I think is big. I see a lot of people play it and then try to wipe. I think it probably does replace it. Yeah, exactly. Because if I've got a bunch of zombies, can I just kill you now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This reminds me a lot of other types of pump effects that I'm very excited about. The one thing, a major downside that we haven't mentioned, of course, is if somebody removes your Banner of Kinship in combat, all of your creatures lose the pump. It's not like Shared Animosity, which is an attack trigger that pumps all those creatures. It is a static effect that is making them more powerful.
But that's true of Coat of Arms and a lot of these.
It's true of Jetmir, who's
exactly.
extremely powerful. So
yeah.
A very cool card. I think we're going to see a lot of it. In terms of what decks want it, we've definitely alluded to it already. Typal decks, token decks, go in wide, make them tall.
Yep. All right, the next card is a big one. It's Blasphemous Edict. 3 black for a sorcery, but it says you may pay black rather than pay this spell's mana cost if there are 13 or more creature cards on the battlefield. Sorry, creatures, they don't say cards anymore. And then its effect is each player sacrifices 13 creatures of their choice.
Woo! It's Blasphemous Act in black.
Pretty interesting.
This card is so efficient.
Yeah.
It's hard to argue that this is, if not, it's definitely top 5 black board wipe. I would call it probably top 2. I would call it second only to Toxic Deluge, right?
So one question I have written down, and we can tackle it now, is where do you rank this among black board wipes, i.e. Toxic Deluge? Is it better or worse? Because it's not clear cut that it's not better.
I don't think it's better than Toxic Deluge because there are situations in Commander where you need a board wipe that this doesn't solve.
Yeah.
There's Scootsworm situations, there's token overrun situations, there's a lot of
And Toxic Deluge does allow you to choose the amount, so you can often also do the thing where you're like, oh, I have 2 creatures that have 6 toughness and nobody else does.
Yeah.
I'll save, I get to keep 2 things.
Yeah.
Which this doesn't do. Yeah, I agree, but I think it's pretty close because 1 mana versus 3 mana is a big difference. Especially on board wipes. You board wipe and then you pass the turn and Rachel repopulates her board because, usually board wiping in a situation where you're in the mid to late game, people have a decent amount of mana available to them. And the fact that board wipes are not usually cheap, you go, okay, board wipe, whew. And then Rachel goes, ba, 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 ba. And you're like, crap, that's a big board. And then Jimmy goes, ga, da, 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 da. And you're like, crap, that's a lot. And then Megan goes, da, 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 da. And you're like, now it's coming back to my turn. I'm the one that board wiped, and I'm just as behind as I was when I cast the board wipe. I feel like I need another board wipe again because I used my turn wiping the board. They used their turn repopulating it before I got to go. This can flip that on its head where you go, one black, boom. Now I'm going da 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 and passing the turn, and they're in this situation where like, crap, Josh got to repopulate before I did because that 1 mana didn't really, that's not a big tax.
Yeah, I mean, the efficiency is busted here. Like there's a reason that Blasphemous Act gets played, and Blasphemous Act has a similar problem. There's situations where the creatures are too big that 13 damage doesn't kill them, and Blasphemous Act doesn't answer it. But it's efficient enough and it's good enough that it goes in every red deck.
Yeah.
And I think that is the situation that we're looking at with Blasphemous Edict. I think the only way this doesn't wind up in almost every black deck is if it's too expensive.
Like too money-wise?
Money-wise, yeah.
Yeah, I do think there are some things that are downsides a little bit when you compare it to Blasphemous Act. So for one, it doesn't get the reduction one at a time. It's either 1 mana or 5 mana. There's
That's
no
true.
4 mana, 3 mana, or 2 mana version. So it's not like, hey, if there are 12 creatures on the battlefield or 11 creatures on the battlefield, right, it only goes to 1.
That's true. And
that's
Blasphemous Act only requires you to get to 8 creatures on the board. 13 is significantly more than that.
Exactly. And we've all cast Blasphemous Act for 4 mana or 3 mana sometimes when you have to. Blasphemous Edict does not have that mode. And I think, listen, it's a small downside, but it is a downside. And I think when you play with it, you're going to run into situations. Also, people do have more than 13 creatures sometimes. It's Cute Swarm, like you were talking about, token decks, zombie decks, whatever. You could easily run into a situation where you're like, okay, everyone's going to sack 13 creatures, but
It's not enough.
Jimmy's going to have 6 left.
Yeah.
Or Jimmy's going to have 40 left. And you're like, Blasphemous Act at least does it to everything. So definitely, like, it's not like this card is perfect, which I think is good.
Yeah, I agree.
There are some downsides. I still think it's amazing, and just the fact that it can do what it does for 1 black mana.
Yeah.
That mode is so strong.
It's really powerful.
And that's going to be the mode most of the time. It's just not that hard to get to 13 creatures. That's basically like 4 creatures each with one person having 5.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot, but it's...
It happens, though.
But when you're casting a board wipe, that's kind of the point in the game that you're at, right? So there's also additional upside we haven't talked about. This gets around Indestructible.
Yep. Sacrifice.
Which is, an upside that
Toxic
Toxic Deluge
Deluge
has
does,
as well,
yeah,
but
yep.
not Blasphemous Act. And it has additional sacrifice synergies. So
Yeah.
it goes really well with things like Mayhem Devil that trigger whenever a player sacrifices a thing.
Yep.
It's extremely powerful. It's good with Turgid, God of Fright, or like Mirkwood Bats whenever you create or sacrifice a token. Most board wipes are not going to trigger these things
Yeah.
unless you're paying 6 mana, 7 mana for it. So it has a lot of additional synergies, especially if you're building around sacrifice as a theme.
Yeah. I really love this card. I mean, I think it's very powerful. And we're going to go to the what decks want it section, and I just put most black decks.
I think it's black decks is the answer. It's frustrating to me that this doesn't answer Scoot Swarm.
Yeah.
Because that is a real situation that you're in Commander
It
where
answers
like,
it if you catch it early enough.
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. It definitely, I mean,
But-
honestly, if they got more than 13 Scoot Swarms, they already won, right? Like, like how far in do
Maybe.
they have to get?
They gotta
before you're
untap
like,
with
I'm
it, I
done?
suppose.
Yeah.
It's
True. That's true.
yeah.
Okay. So
it's I think playing like this in addition to a Massacre Worm, so you've got like both sides, right? Where you have the board wipe that answers the little, like lots of little guys, and you have your Toxic Deluge and this. Now you've sort of covered more of your bases. But yeah, basically every black deck that wants board wipes, I think, plays this.
yeah.
It's very powerful.
All right. The next card's very interesting.
Yeah, we had to talk about it. I don't know how good it is.
Yeah. I'm the same boat.
Both modes are very good.
It's like, I like all this stuff, but
Yeah.
when you got to the what decks wanted, I was like, I'm not sure.
It's Crystal Barricade. 1 and a white for an artifact creature wall. It has Defender. It's a 0/4. It says you have hexproof. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. Those are both very good words.
Yeah.
Like, sentences, I guess.
You have hexproof it's like a thing. Well, I wouldn't mind having hexproof.
Yeah,
But then
yes.
you think of like, well, but what decks are like specifically this deck wants hexproof?
Yeah, that's definitely the interesting thing here is this feels like it's a defensive piece against narrow strategies. So it's definitely kind of a meta call. And I was like, all right, what does this defend against? What does hexproof like actually stop? And it's kind of a lot. Like it's Blood Artist triggers are targeted, Altar of Dementia, Josh, targeted.
Oh man, you sold me already.
Like River's Rebuke, you can't get hit by that, or like a Settle the Wreckage. There's a lot of targeted effects now that you don't want to happen to you.
Right.
And incidentally will be very frustrating to your opponents. But is that a card that I would play?
Because it's hard to know going into any given game whether that's going to happen this game. It happens often, but certainly not every game do you get targeted by a Blood Artist, an Alternate Dimension, or a River's Rebuke, right? Mm-hmm. And you think of most games of Commander you play, it's hard to weigh. Like, in most games, do I get targeted directly in some way? And in a way that's like enough that I wish I had a card to stop it, too. You know what I mean?
So the only time I've seen a You Have Hexproof card played in a deck is it was a graveyard deck, and it was to defend against things like Bojuka Bog.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And it's one of the few targeted effects that don't have a ton of redundancy that say each.
Yeah.
Because a lot of commander cards are each player, or each opponent. So this doesn't help protect you against that, but graveyard removal tends to be, target player exiles or graveyard.
Yeah.
So that is the one situation that I was like, okay, this is like to defend you against graveyard hate.
So if you have a graveyard focused deck that touches white, this is a pretty good consideration.
You could
for
look
that
at
first
it.
ability.
Yeah. And then there's the second ability that's prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control.
It's another thing where you're like, definitely creatures take non-combat damage, but it's a similar thing where you're like, Blasphemous Act we were just talking about.
Yeah.
But Blasphemous Act definitely doesn't get cast every game of Commander you play.
Yeah.
So how often are my creatures taking non-combat damage? Now, this is something you have more control over.
Yeah.
Because Hexproof wouldn't protect you from being targeted by yourself.
Right.
But if you're like, oh, my deck deals damage to all creatures in some way, now all of a sudden this is a thing where like I have some control over this and can put this ability in proactively into my deck.
Right. If you're like a Pyrohemia deck or something like that.
Yeah.
Then this is a very powerful effect that turns all of those into one-sided wraths.
Well, it turns one of them into it because this protects other creatures,
yes,
right?
Yeah, it dies to the wipe.
You Blasphemous Act and the barricade itself dies, but it protects everything else from taking that damage. But then like Pyrohemia, it's almost not even that great, although you can do up to 3, I guess, because it's got 4 toughness.
Yeah.
And then
That's good.
Doing 3 damage to every creature and player every turn would be really powerful, so maybe that is good enough. Pestilence the same way.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because... So I guess if you had a deck that just had a lot of that stuff in it instantly already and was touching white, then this becomes pretty good because the hexproof part is just kind of gravy.
Yeah. That's all of the ways that I could think about this.
Yeah.
And we get to this question is what decks want this?
Yeah. And I
was
like, this is a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, the only way I could really consider it is if I wanted cheap creatures and that hexproof, like protecting my graveyard, was really relevant. And I think the preventing damage is gravy. Most of the time when you're running a ton of damage-based like removal, like if you're running Pyrohemia, if you're running all of that stuff, generally you benefit from the damage being dealt in some way.
Yeah, so like your creatures actually want to take the damage.
Yeah, so you get into this weird situation where you're like, this doesn't actually, like hypothetically, these are all the cards that it's good with, but this sort of prevents my actual game plan. Because if you're in white, why are you playing damage-based wraths? You have white.
Right. So you would need to have like
a reason to play the damage
and things that are like, hey, when I take damage, something happens.
Right.
Enraged creatures,
Right.
And all of a sudden, you don't want to stop that damage because that's
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I put maybe metas. Again, I think a lot of people play out there in specific play groups and metas that you are being targeted a lot because we play with a pretty big play group and we go to Magic Cons and we play with people from all over the world. So you never know what you're going to see. But a lot of people are playing in a play group with the same 4 to 6 players. And all those players have a couple of decks. And so like there's 3 or 4 decks that are showing up a lot. Maybe you're the graveyard deck that Bojuka bogging you all the time. Or they're playing like, stuff that does target you, Altar of Dimensions and things like that or whatever. And then I think it's a candidate in those cases where the hexproof matters a lot more just because it's kind of silver bullet-y against what you're seeing a lot.
Walking ballistas. Like there's a lot of ways that this can save you. It can prevent you from getting decked with like a brain freeze, but that Brain Geyser was the one I was thinking of.
Yep.
Brain freeze, those kind of things. So being hexproof is nice. And I've definitely playing against the hexproof. I was like, that is annoying. That stops a lot of the things I'm trying to do.
but I still don't know if it's worth a card in any given deck, in a random deck.
Yeah. So meta call, but very interesting card, and honestly close. I'm close to trying it just because I'm curious.
Throw it in and see how good it is.
I just want to see what it feels like.
Sometimes you're surprised. You throw it in and you're like, this is good every time.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're like, it just doesn't do anything too often.
Yeah.
All right, the next card is Exemplar of Light. This one's going to be a lot easier to figure out what decks it goes in. It's 2 white for a 3/3 flying angel. It says, whenever you gain life, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. Whenever you put one or more 1/1 counters on this creature, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn.
Thank goodness.
So it's got that Dusk Legion Duelist text on it.
Yeah, the +1 counters line is from Dusk Legion Duelist, and then it has this additional clause that's like whenever you gain life, you get counters.
Now the counter thing and the gain life thing is more that can happen any amount of times per turn.
Right.
So it can grow, as big as the number of times you gain life. It's just you only draw the card the one time.
Yeah, I mean this is an enormous threat. This is a must-answer threat in a life gain deck. Yeah. It's getting enormous. It's flying. It's drawing cards. It has to be removed. Yeah. And I think if you're playing a deck that has all of the Soul Sisters in it, the Soul Warden, Soul's Attendant, you put this in the deck. You just do.
Yeah. If you have the Soul Sisters or any of those, like, hey, whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life, for sure this goes in, right? Because you're gaining life in small increments all the time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think this is a must answer, but it's not a must answer the moment it hits the battlefield. Yeah. So it's not like a thing that you have to constantly live in fear of. It's just
if they're drawing 4 cards a turn.
Yeah, that's a lot. I guess if they get a Soul Warden out and an Exemplar of Light, it's like crap.
They're drawing a lot.
Yeah. People hopefully don't cast creature for a second.
People will play the 1, maybe.
People do that with Esper Sentinel, where they're like, okay, I'm just going to cast creatures.
Yeah.
Until somebody deals with this as much as possible. They play around it a little.
I don't know. Soul Warden is always hopeless. You're like, all right.
No, but with the Exemplar of Light, I think once that has value, you're like, cool.
Sure, you're I'm going to chill.
Yeah, I'm going to play a sorcery and a rock here and hope somebody deals with this thing.
Yeah, it's really scary. And in those decks, I think it's a slam dunk.
Yeah.
I think the big question mark for this deck, this card for me, is does this make the cut in +1/+1 counter decks?
Yeah, I think the question you have to ask yourself, because there's sort of a couple of different ways +1/+1 counter decks go. Mm-hmm. There's the ones where the cards you're playing get 1/1 counters, and then there are the cards I'm playing give +1/+1 counters. So if you're in the give type, this becomes pretty good. If you're in the get type, worse, because you probably just don't have as much ability to put the counters onto this thing. Like it doesn't, because you're not going to have the life gain to really do it. So that I think it just depends on what the tenor of your +1/+1 counter deck is. Yeah,
my feeling is like if you're handing out counters every single turn, then you look at it. And if you're the kind of +1/+1 counter deck where it's like I put 10 on and 10 more and 10 and then attack, this is not going to make the cut. It's just too expensive.
I think it's pretty good though if your deck reliably can put a 1/1 counter onto it once per turn.
Yeah, I agree.
That's one draw. You're going to put counters on something. You might as well be it's pretty good to put it on and draw a card.
Yeah. You wrote down
evasive threat too.
Like Rocco Street Chef, I think is a really great example of where this deck wants to be, because you're reliably putting +1/+1 counters on every turn, and you have the food tokens to crack and gain some life. Is like the perfect space for it.
Yeah, that's really really good. But I even think Shadrix or something might be okay, where it's like, hey, I put a 1/1 counter on all my creatures once per turn, draw 1 card. It's it's not the best card in my deck in that case, but I'm still pretty happy with putting a counter on a flying threat that draws me a card. Like, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Heliod Suncrown is pretty good, though.
The one I thought of was Lathiel, the green-white unicorns. Whenever you gain life at end of turn, you put that many counters on a thing. And I was like, well, those are both the right words. Sounds busted. In the right deck, Exemplar of Light is going to be a remove on sight angel.
All right, you can read the next one.
I'm excited. You know cool. I'm excited. It's
Best
Hare
name in this set.
Apparent.
Hare Apparent.
Because it is a hare.
Not H-E-I-R.
It's a bunny.
Yeah, not H-A-I-R.
H-A-R-E.
Yes.
Is a rabbit. 1 and a white for a creature, rabbit noble. When this creature enters, create a number of 1/1 white rabbit creature tokens equal to the number of other creatures you control named Hare Apparent. A deck can have any number of cards named Hare Apparent.
The Shadowborn Apostle text.
Yes. Notably, this one, you need to have 2 in play to start making a token.
The first one doesn't make a token.
Yes.
Because it doesn't see itself. So the second one sees the first one and goes, oh, cool, I'll make a rabbit.
Yeah, I can help with
that. The third
that.
one sees the other two and says, I'll make 2 rabbits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then now we're in business.
Yeah.
So this is the kind of card that is going to snowball really, really fast.
Yep.
It is going to be less of a, like, Dragon's approach is like I cast a 1 and a 1 and a 1 and a 1. And this is like I cast 1 and 2 and 1,000.
That's what you're going to want to do.
Ideally.
For sure. Yeah.
There's a lot of cards that sort of go in all of these if you have any number.
Especially if they're a creature.
Especially if they're a creature. Thrumming Stone, obviously, if you haven't played with it before, it's going to put all the rabbits into play. And good luck doing the rabbit
you're
math.
running in the 27 to 30-ish amount, Thrumming Stone often just casts all of them.
Yeah.
Which will be nuts. I mean, you'll have a lot of rabbits.
Yeah. And you'll have to do the math.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of like cool creature-based ones. Wild Pear is a 6-mana green enchantment. Says whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand, you may search your library for a creature with the same total power and toughness and put it onto the battlefield if you do shuffle. So it gets you another rabbit.
Pretty great.
Remembrance is one I found. It's whenever
I have this in my Shadowborn Apostle decks.
Whenever a non-token creature you control is put into a graveyard, you may search your library for a copy of that creature. If you do, reveal that card, put it into your hand, and shuffle.
Yeah.
Seems great in Shadowborn Apostles, but also this one, if there's a board wipe, you just replace all the ones on the board.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. 3 died, I'll get 3 to my hand. One of the things about decks like this is like you always want to make sure you have a few like in your hand. Like a few on the battlefield, a few in your hand, so you're never like stopped up. And remember, it just says like, yep, then I'm going to cast 3 more, and if you board wipe again, I'll have 3 in my hand still. So
How many Shadowborn Apostles do you run?
I think I'm 29.
29?
Yeah.
That makes sense for a creature
I think
one.
I started at 34, 35, and it was a little too many. But I've seen people that run at like 25, and I feel that's a little too light. Like
I run 25 Dragons approaches, but those are more expensive. They're a little different than
in
like
my Dragons
cheap
approach
creatures.
deck, I believe I was at 24. So I think Slimes Against Humanity runs
It's
closer to
about
that.
25.
Yeah, creatures you want for whatever reason a little bit more. There tends to be a little more creature synergy with like pumping everything of this type or whatever.
Yeah. So there's a lot of cards that sort of go in this neighborhood. I think the coolest one is Pack Hunt, in my opinion. It's search your library for up to 3 copies of target creature. So it's a card in play and reveal them, put them into your hand and then shuffle your library. So you're like, I have this rabbit. I'm going to go draw 3 rabbits.
For 4 mana, that's pretty good.
Is pretty good. Doubling Chant doubles the number of rabbits you have on the board. It's like, oh, you have 4 Hare Apparents? Let me go find 4 for you and put them directly onto the battlefield. Yeah, gross.
That's pretty good. There's a new card from this set.
That's busted with it.
That's really good.
Yeah, we're going to talk about it in a little bit, but it goes along with this thing that they've been doing lately with that just cares about like low power creatures. It's been a white archetype.
Yeah, it's been a white archetype, sometime a little with black and other colors, but yeah, it's this, hey, we care about creatures with mana value 2 or less. So Raise the Past is a new card from Foundations, 2 white for sorcery. Return all creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
Nice.
I used to run Immortal Servitude in my Shadowborn Apostle deck, which is basically similar, but it's 3 mana and X to get X CMC. So that's 4 mana for my Shadowborn Apostles, but would be 5 mana to get Hare Apparent back. And this is just 4 mana as long as it's 2 CMC.
Get
all of them.
Yeah. I mean, that card seems great. Like Delny, that doubles the triggers of things power 1 and less.
It's Hare Harmonicon now.
Yeah, gross. This seems like an incredible Revelark deck.
Yep. Jeez.
I also was excited. This is like the first deck that I look at and I'm like, that is an Assemble the Players deck.
Yeah.
Which is the 2-mana enchantment from, I believe this is Karlov Manor, that lets you play creatures with power 2 or less off the top of your library. You only get it once per turn, but this draws you a hare every single turn. And these decks are sort of famously tough to keep cards in your hand because so many of them are the same.
And they're cheap, so you just tend to cast a lot of them. Yeah. And it's hard to actually build a deck that has a critical mass of 2 power or less. It's been tough.
Right.
Because you get to like 15 good ones and then you're like 16, 17. Yeah, I need some bigger stuff, right? Some 3s and 4 drops.
I need something.
Not this deck. It's like, nope, probably 8 out of 10 creatures in the deck are Hare Apparent. So, and white has all the, support for what's going on here. So Anointed Procession, Cathar's Crusade, Mondrak, all the ways to be like, oh, and there's the tripler,
Hare Talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has the other synergies that are sort of required for a token to make a token deck work. And the Hare Apparents make rabbit tokens. So you can already sort of pair this up. And now you you don't even need the other color to necessarily help you with the token part. They can help with pumping, or they can help with drawing cards, or they can help with recursion. So you can choose your other color based on which ones, because white gives you everything you need within its little package to be like, cool, 2 mana value or less. Can I help make more tokens? Yes. Can I pump the tokens? Yes. Okay.
Can I bring them back from the graveyard?
Yeah.
There's a couple ways that white does that as well. I mean, this is going to be busted. This is going to be a very powerful strategy, and I think it's really going to depend on what commander you pick for like how it wins the game. Like obviously it's going to make a lot of rabbits. What do those rabbits do is sort of up to you.
Yeah, what angle of attack do you want to take as far as like, do you want to make the most rabbits possible and win that way? Do you want to make your rabbits as big as possible and win that way? Do you want to sort of aristocrat your way to victory? And I think there's, the what deck wants this doesn't work for this card because it's a rare in the 99 card that you do build around because you put 30 of it in your deck.
You better be building around it.
Yeah. You build a brand new deck. You don't just slot a Hare Apparent into a deck, right? This is a new deck from the ground up. So it functions almost more like a commander than an in the 99 card.
Right. So we flipped this question on its head a little bit and we're like, okay, who are you putting in the command zone? And there's a lot of really great flavor options for this.
A lot of rabbits.
There's a lot of great rabbits that work well with it. Obviously, they're from Bloomborough. Phineas, Ace, Archer puts +1/+1 counters on your tokens and your rabbits. So that's more of like an Anthem effect or a counters deck. I think the most busted way to take this is with Balin the Haymaker. Red, green, white for a rabbit warrior. You tap 2 untapped tokens you control to add 1 mana of any color. You tap 3 untapped tokens you control to draw a card, and you tap 4 untapped tokens you control to put 3 +1/+1 counters on Balin. It gains trample until end of turn.
Pretty good. Balin is quite good. And
if I'm playing Balin, I'm running 60 Hare Apparents.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, because the tokens turn into mana dorks that can cast more Hare Apparents. I think
Balin's like, I got mana. It draws.
Yeah, but you need 3 untapped tokens to do it. You'll need a pretty big draw engine to be able to keep that going, but Balin will help you get there. I think you don't want 60 though, right?
I mean, I'm gonna run.
That means you have 3 non-Hare Apparent cards. What are the
I don't need anything else.
What are the 3 cards?
Phineas. They're all rabbits. I mean, you just have so much of your engine in the command zone that like your deck can be a ton of these. Like if you're building a Balin deck, all you want is token makers.
Yeah, it's like
that's what these are.
Remembrance, Storming Stone, Raise the Past.
Yeah.
Those are the other 3 cards.
And that's like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty busted. Preston the Vanisher, it would be more of like a Blink style rabbit deck.
Yeah, you can definitely blink them, right? Because they have an ETB. You put Brago down, which I think is really smart. Just blink them all.
Yeah.
So
they all see each other.
Yeah, so if you've got 3 out, you just blink all 3, and when they come back, they all make 3 rabbits because they come back in at the same time. That seems very strong.
If you want to go more of a graveyard route, I like something like Nethroi, Apex of Death, because they have very low power, so you can mill a ton of them into your graveyard, mutate with Nethroi, and get a ton all at once. Feels like a very stable sort of graveyard-focused version of this.
I put Mondrak down because it does double the token, so if you're going for the leading the token thing, I thought Arabella is a pretty fun one. Whenever Arabella attacks, it deals X damage to each opponent, and you gain X life, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 2 or less. So, yeah, that's pretty good. I thought Nico was actually a really good choice.
Nico's a great answer. I love this.
And probably a very powerful way to build it because it has the blink, so you can do it. But also, once you get like 6 or 7 shards, you just turn them all into Hare Apparents, cast 1 Hare Apparent, and profit.
There you go.
That seems pretty good.
Before we move on from this, I do want to mention Bess Soul Nourisher because she seems cracked. Whenever 1 or more other creatures with base power and toughness 1/1 enter the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on Bess. Whenever Bess attacks, each other creature you control with base power and toughness 1 gets +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of counters on Bess. Get yourself a little rabbit stew going.
Yep.
A little rabbit stew?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of the other cards like this that you can have any number of, they actually have a smaller list of possible commanders than Hare Apparent has. So Hare Apparent gives you a lot more different flavors that you can kind of, or directions you can kind of choose to go in.
Yeah.
Because like we said, there's blink, there's recursion, there's pump, there's lean into more tokens. So I think we're going to see more variations of this maybe than we have on some of the other ones, which is cool.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is very powerful. I think it's going to be very popular, which means these are probably going to be kind of expensive. So
you have to get 30 at a time. You're not getting you're not buying 1.
So keep an eye out for Hare Apparents and try and collect them while you can because Dragon's Approaches are like $3.
Yeah, I mean, and this one's probably going to be more.
I agree. It's going
to be more popular and like if there's special versions or foil ones or whatever, definitely keep an eye out for those in packs. They'll be worth something.
Yeah.
All right, the next card, to nobody's surprise, is I'm excited about. It's a High Fae Trickster. So 3 and a blue for a fairy wizard. It's a 4/2, has flash and flying, and says you may cast spells as though they had flash.
They did it!
They did it. It's a Vidalcan Ori with flash itself on a creature, and it's blue, so it doesn't go into colors. But still, so I've had a chance to play with Valley Floodcaller a little bit, and I like it a lot.
That's the otter that only flashes in non-creature spells.
Right, and it also has flash. It's a 3-drop.
Yeah.
And I've liked it quite a bit, and it's only been a few months, and you don't play the same deck all the time, so I've probably had it in my hand or cast it less than 5 times, but I have been pretty happy with both, mostly with the fact that it has flash. I think that was really the thing that changed it the most. And the one thing I would say about Valley Floodcaller is you can't cast creatures with it, and that's the one thing I've thought when having it. I was like, it's good. I really like it. I'm happy with everything about it. I wish I could cast creatures with it. And they were like, we got you.
Just you wait.
We got you.
Yeah, I think when Final Word Phantom came out, we were like, maybe? No.
Yeah.
And then when Valley Floodcaller came out, we were like, maybe?
I've been happy with it. I think,
and it's good.
But not like, yes.
Yeah, and this is exactly the kind of card that this deck wants. It's so frustrating to have a 4-mana permanent that doesn't have flash, that goes in a deck that clearly prioritizes flash.
Yeah.
And now we can flash it in like everything else.
And the flash really mitigates the mana costs. And also because, that's what I found with Valley Floodcaller, is often in mid-game when I've got 6 or 7 mana, because I have it in my hand, I just pass. Because I can flash this in, then do the other thing, because it allows me to do that, which is what High Fae Trickster does too, which is like, I can now conceal my entire turn from you, not just this one card. Flash it in, followed up with flashing in something else. So that's been very powerful.
We talked a lot about how powerful flash is in the How to Play Blue episode. If you haven't watched that, go check it out. It's awesome, and that makes this card awesome. I'm very excited. I got a couple of places I want to try it.
I'm very excited. Yeah, I'm definitely, I think you just, I already have, for the most part, taken out a lot of Vidalcan Oris, but I can take out the rest of them unless they're in non-blue decks, and put this in its place. I think it's just going to be a lot better. And then it can go in decks where, like, I took out Ori and just didn't replace it with anything that does something similar and just kind of went in a different direction. So when we go to the what deck wants it category, I said decks with blue in them. But upon thinking about it, I think, I always thought about Vidalcan Ori like Panharmonicon in that it is a force multiplier for a certain other cards in my deck. As Panharmonicon force multiplies all the enter the battlefield effects of your deck. This force multiplies all the non-instants in your deck. So if your deck already has 50% plus instants, this probably doesn't want to go in because it's not force multiplying enough things. But if your deck doesn't, then I kind of believe that it does because it will force multiply all the artifacts, all the creatures, all the sorceries.
It's like not planeswalkers and lands decks, but maybe even lands decks.
Yeah, because they still cast spells.
Yeah, but like you can't play the lands after playing them, but still kind of the lands decks because they have a lot of mana.
Well, you do it on end step and then untap it still.
Then you play the lands.
And then you play the cultivates and the rampant growth. So yeah.
It's very powerful. I think if you haven't played with this kind of effect, it is really worth trying so you can understand how much it changes the way that you play.
Yeah, you feel so safe when you have it. But it's when you stick it and you have untapped mana with it. And that's been the problem with Vidalcan Ori is just to get it out there requires you to tap out. And that one moment is just not worth it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think we're back, baby.
We're Vidalcan Ori-ing.
We're Fae Trickstering. We're tricking.
Fae-Dalkin?
Fae-Dalkin Ori.
Ish. I don't know. We'll work on a better one. Vidalcan Ori on a stick. How about that?
So you would think that this is my favorite card in the set, and it is, but if there is a card on here that is in the running for my favorite card in the set with this card, it's the next card we're going to talk about.
But we have to hear a few words from our sponsors first.
Sorry.
Hi there, I'm Renma, Creaking Nest, but you can call me Friendma because all I want to do is make bird tokens for everyone! But once I've made my tokens, I've got to sell them, and I'm no salesman, I'm a scarecrow full of birds! That's why I use Shopify. No one does selling better than Shopify. They've helped me in 2 or more types of ways. Using Shopify has really helped my business grow, letting me sell my tokens all over the world instead of just to my opponents. Plus, with Shopify, I get the #1 checkout on the planet with ShopPay, which helps me turn more bird browsers into bird buyers. In fact, Shopify is the business behind the business for many successful companies, including the Command Zone and Allbirds, who, despite their name, foolishly don't sell birds at all. But the fact remains, businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Because Shopify is for the birds, in a good way!
Upgrade your business and get the same checkout we use. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/TCZ, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/TCZ to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/TCZ. This show is sponsored by Liquid IV.
Season's greetings, cool cats! This year, I, Jetmir, Nexus of Revels, will throw the most perfect holiday party! This whole crime family will come together as the Halo Fountain! Well, look. We may have used up all of our angel juice at my Meowloween masquerade, but fear not. I found a new source of hydration to keep everyone fully pumped. Liquid IV. It's the best way to stay hydrated through the holidays with 8 vitamins and nutrients plus 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink. 1 stick of Liquid IV with 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone, so you can tear, pour, and live more. Never let the party leave you parched again, whether you need to stay vigilant on Commander Night, trample the dance floor, or double strike a pose on the runway. Proper hydration is a must. Halo was good, but this pina colada flavor is simply divine. Hey, how do they make this stuff?
No angels were harmed in the making of Liquid IV.
Stay hydrated through the holidays with Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com and use code COMMAND at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code COMMAND at liquidiv.com. Yes! I win! Probably. Anyway.
Probably. What's going on?
I just goldfished a huge turn on ARCHIDEKT. Check it out. They've got the best playtester in the business. Playing and tapping your cards is as simple as clicking them. Everything goes right where you want it, but you can drag things by hand and group them together in different ways too. Then there's easy shortcut keys for things like making copies, sending cards between zones, and starting the next turn.
Nice. So this is a Traxo. All that proliferating's gotta take a while.
It doesn't actually. Just right click and hit proliferate all counters.
Oh wow. Yeah, you probably do win.
I think so.
ARCHIDEKT is the best place to browse, brew, and playtest commander decks. Just go to archidekt.com/commandzone to get started.
That's ARCHIDEKT.com/command zone.
Welcome back, everybody. We're talking about cards from Foundations, and we're getting to Josh's maybe favorite, competing for a Verdalcan Ori with flash speed. That is a high honor.
Yeah. I'll read it. It is Homunculus Horde. It has this sweet art with a bunch of Fibbletips, or whatever homunculus is, but it looks, sorry, not Fibbletips, but homunculus. Though they look like Mike Wazowski from Monsters, Inc. Okay, 3 and a blue. For a 2/2, whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a token that's a copy of this creature.
Cool.
So you draw your second card, you make a second Homunculus Horde. Now, if you draw your second card on another turn, you'll make 2 more because you have 2. Now you've got 4. You draw your second card on somebody else's turn, you make 4 more because you have 4. So it's Scoot Swarms.
Yeah, it's a Scoot Swarm. It's slower than a Scoot Swarm, and it's less free than a Scoot Swarm.
Could be faster than a Scoot Swarm,
but it's really sweet.
I guess it's slower because you can do everything for Scoot Swarm on your turn.
Yeah, you can only double it once per turn. Is what I mean by that. This card's really neat.
I love it.
And the whole time I was thinking about what decks it goes in, I was thinking about Ms. Bumbleflower.
Oh, it's so good in Bumbleflower. It'd be insane. Yeah. I build a lot of decks that are just trying to weaponize card draw because I want to draw a lot of cards and I want all my decks to draw a lot of cards. And then it's like, okay, once I'm doing that, it will aid everything else I'm doing because I'll have the options and everything. But if I can just turn that literally into the win, that's so much easier. Yeah. Right? And this card does that. Oh, you're going to draw lots of cards? Yes, I am going to draw a lot of cards. I'm already going to do that no matter what it is. So this card just says, cool. So while you're doing the thing you already want to do, how about if I just help you win?
What if I draw cards for my job?
Yeah. Yes.
I mean, this card's awesome. I think it is tricky to get online because it's a 4-mana creature. It's a 4-mana 2/2. Yeah. And when you cast it, it's very, very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Because You have to be able to double it sort of right then, and that's when the problem happens. But while you just have a 4-mana 2/2 and you haven't drawn your second card per turn, it's very, very squishy. And Scootsworm, you can like play it resolves, and you play your land, and there's no moments of priority, right?
Right.
I guess they could kill it, and no, they can't. There's no moments of priority. This, you play it, you put your second card draw on the stack. There is a moment that people can respond and kill this.
Yes.
So it is a little delicate. But as soon as you have that second homunculus, you're in business.
Good. It's really the same as Scootsworm at that point, as far as like they need a board wipe, kind of.
Yeah.
At that point, because 2 removal spells. Because what we're saying that is, if they kill the first one, but a second one got made, then that second one becomes the new seed that's
the new
gonna
first
grow.
one. Yeah.
So
the thing that I was thinking about first is I was like, okay, how do I draw a second card the moment I cast this?
Yeah.
It goes very well, I think, with like Guardian projects and the Great Henge, and those kind of things that like when this enters, you draw an additional card, get a second copy right away, and now the homunculus army begins.
Yeah.
You know what this is? This is minions.
It is minions, and that's why they look like that. They do kind of look like minions. They're just not.
Oh no.
If you have Guardian Project and Grey Henge, of course, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But I think, there's so many ways in blue, and you want to be in one of these decks that just has a lot of like Gitaxian Prove, Brainstorm type of stuff.
Yeah.
Because yes, they could kill it when you have that second card draw on the stack, but it's not that hard to find a moment where most likely your creature is not going to get killed during your turn the turn you cast it. That's not that hard to find those openings. Maybe they're going to go to try and kill it on their turn or whatever. Those are harder to predict. But I think if you have a Git Probe or a Brainstorm or an Opt or something like that, you can feel pretty good casting this, casting that other thing. I'll make a second one. And now it's like...
And you're in business.
Are 2 removal spells going to be used on this thing in the next rotation? That seems nuts.
Yeah, that sounds crazy.
Yeah.
Before we move on to what decks this goes in, because there's some really fun
It's
options.
like all the decks I have.
Yeah, I know. This is a list of Josh decks. I think we'll get a lot of comments if we don't mention it. This is obviously incredible with Consecrated Sphinx.
Yeah, of course.
Because you draw 2 cards and then you make 1, you draw 2, you make 1, or you make 2. It's incredible. If you have 10 mana worth of blue permanents on the board, you're in a good spot.
You're in a good spot. Yeah, exactly. That's... If you've cast a Consecrated Sphinx, almost anything you're playing with it still out there is going to be good.
It's going to be pretty good.
They couldn't kill the Sphinx.
Yeah.
So you're probably winning.
But you're right. It definitely is. All right. Ms. Bumbleflower, it's insane. So I think it's decks that can reliably draw 2 cards, preferably on multiple turns, but if they can just draw 2 cards on your commander somewhere, or they care about you drawing 2 cards per turn, of course this goes right in.
Yeah, I would want my deck to reliably be able to draw 2 cards on 2 players' turns per rotation.
Okay. I think that's a decent floor. Yeah.
I think just mine is probably not quite enough to run this card. You're probably not a card draw deck exactly. There are card draw decks that are like trying to, going to draw 10 at a time or something, and that's probably not as good for this.
Right.
This wants it to be more like Soul Sister style.
A little bit drips
of
and
like,
drabs.
Drips and drabs, yeah, exactly. But there's a lot of decks that are able to do that. Bumbleflower, you said.
Yep.
Shorikai. Man, I sign a lot of Shorikais these days. There's a lot of Shorikai decks out there.
Yes, it is super popular. I mean, any deck that's designed to build around drawing your second card for turn, like Zimone and Dina, helps you do that. Alondra Sky Dreamer.
Yep.
Sky Dancer, they're all doing all sorts of stuff in the sky.
They're up there,
Cares about you drawing your second card, gives you a token, so the deck is designed to do that kind of thing. Min, Wily, Illusionist all does the same thing.
Yeah, and I think you can assume in those decks, you probably already built them to be able to draw 2 cards on your turn and somebody else's turn at the very least.
Yeah.
And you want the ability, like Bumbleflower, to maybe I can draw 2 cards on 3 players' turns. Because that's a nutso, like, 2 Homunculus into 4 Homunculus into 8 Homunculus. I'm coming back to my turn, I got 8.
Yeah. It's very, like, for a little while it's defensive and annoying, and then you make 8, and people are like, okay.
There's going to be 64 of those real
This is going to be a problem. It's like... Okay, we need to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, one more rotation, we dead. Yeah.
Yeah.
And even if we, like, what do you, it's board wipe or nothing, they're in blue. Like, it becomes very, like, the end is very near. And your deck will probably have very few ways to get out of it once they untap with 8.
Yeah, I like this card a lot. I think you can do some really fun stuff with it. And anytime I die to a horde of homunculus will make me laugh. I'm into it. More blue cards. Up next is Kaito, Cunning Infiltrator. 1 blue for a legendary planeswalker Kaito. He's got a static ability that says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, put a loyalty counter on Kaito. He's got a +1 ability that says up to one target creature you control can't be blocked this turn. Draw a card, then discard a card. -2, create a 2/1 blue ninja creature token. And -9, you create an emblem with whenever a player casts a spell, you create a 2/1 ninja creature token.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good.
That's pretty good.
I'll take that emblem. Thank you. So let's break this down and talk about them individually. The +1 leaves a little bit to be desired. It's an unblockable ability, which is fine, and a loot, which is fine.
You put this down, and this was the first thing I thought. Planeswalkers that want you to attack are tough because you naturally want to protect them. They are just, they are value pieces that continue to churn on their own. And so generally, play a Planeswalker.
No attacks.
There's no reason to, because I'm going to get advantage off of this Planeswalker. And this one says, well, if you really want to get advantage out of the first ability, you got to attack. So it's fine. It's a fine ability, but it's not it's not like really great on a Planeswalker. What about the second ability, which is -2, make a 2/1?
You should never activate this ability in Commander.
It's not that good.
Unless you are on an empty board, like post-board wipe.
Nothing else going on.
Like nothing on the board.
Yeah.
I don't think I activate this ability in Commander. I think the obvious star of the show is this ultimate. -9 is a lot. It comes in with 3 loyalty. So in order to ultimate this, the turn you play it, you have to hit with 6 creatures the turn you play it.
Yeah, it does get a loyalty counter for every individual creature that deals damage, right?
Yeah, whenever a creature you control deals damage to a player.
To a player.
So if you hit with like 6 fairies, this goes up to 9 immediately.
Which is... I mean, just the ability to ult on the turn you play it is not something that most Planeswalkers come with, right? Most of them, that's just not an option on the card. This is. Now, it's a you got to be able to hit with 6 creatures.
That's
but
a lot.
Not impossible. But also, in a modest case scenario where you're able to hit with 3.
This goes up to 6. You tick it up to 7, and then you defend it for 1 turn. Then you can ultimate on the next turn, and that's fairly reasonable in any sort of flying token-based deck, which is fairly popular in Commander.
Yeah.
So as long as you hit with 5 over the course of 2 turns, you can ultimate it the turn you want to. It doesn't take any damage, It is a little bit telegraphed. You do have to cast this first main, hit with 6 creatures, then ultimate it second main, with a lot of interaction points where things can go wrong. But if you can ultimate this, is pretty busted.
A lot of times, people have 6/1/1 spirits or fairies or whatever, and you're just like, I'm going to get hit for 6, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm going to tap out and do my own thing. And, if they attack me, and you don't see this coming, like you're not thinking like, oh God, they're going to get an emblem for the rest of the game that's just going to make 2/1s, every time people cast spells. That's pretty powerful. So it's not crazy that will happen sometimes. I don't know. This is like a hard card to evaluate.
Yeah. I'm the same way, because I looked at it and I was like, combat-based Planeswalker, that's not for us.
Yeah.
And you're like, you look at the Alelas that make a lot of fairies. You look at something like Elminster that makes a ton of fairy dragons. There's a couple of commanders that can really support this kind of strategy. Some of the ninja decks, although they usually only hit with like 3.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be more of your flying token decks that want this. But then if you can do it, this is sick.
Do you think you sandbag this into your hand and then attempt to play it at a point where you're going to be able to attack with 6 creatures?
Yeah.
So it is kind of a weird finisher, although it won't 100% win the game just because you emblem. It's very good and probably will win you games, but it's not guaranteed.
I mean, if you're in like a spirits deck,
yeah,
and you have 6 spirits,
which is not crazy.
Yeah, you play this, you attack with 3, you hold back the 3, you defend this for 1 turn.
Well, if you can hit for 6, you just do it.
Yeah. If I have 5,
you have 5, yeah,
and you attack with 3, and then next turn you attack with 3, and you can ultimate the next turn. Well,
that's great.
Those token decks are very defensive. They're very difficult to attack into, and they require you to spend a lot of resources to get this Planeswalker off the board, which is kind of difficult to do in Commander. So I think it's kind of good. I think it's good. I think you need to be making, spirits, thopters, dragon fairies, and then you start looking at it. But everything else is going to be a little dodgy for me.
Yeah, I also put down maybe there's a Voltron deck or 2 out there that sees this as like an unblockable spell with upside. So it kind of plays this as a 3 mana, make my Charix was the one I sort of looked at.
Sweet.
I played
Love
against
that.
one Charix deck ever, so
Yeah.
for what that's worth.
I loved seeing that you put Charix on the
But it's
outline. I was like,
boom,
yes, Charix.
unblockable. Pump Charix 3 times, kill you is possible.
Yeah.
So in a deck like that, I don't know how many types of that type of deck even exist out there. Maybe you could view this as like, this is an unblockable spell that has the ability to give me some value and stick around and cause problems as far as they're going to feel like they have to kill it, but at the same time,
It's
it gives
tough.
you a little extra value. Yeah.
It defends you a little bit. I think I could see you using it and then having them attack it to get it off the board, and then it defends you in some way. Most of the time, I think you're just going to run the 1 mana cantripping spells that give your stuff unblockable.
Yeah.
But if you can also defend a planeswalker, then you could look at it for that reason as well. Otherwise, I think it's a really sweet card, and am excited to die to it. Can you imagine that many ninjas showing up? Gee whiz. All right, up next is a divination.
Yeah, it's Lunar Insight. 2 and a blue for a sorcery. Draw a card for each different mana value among non-land permanents you control.
3 mana sorcery. We don't play divinations, which is 3 mana draw 2s. So we want this to be a 3 mana draw 3 or a 3 mana draw 4. Or more, obviously. But
I think, but 3 is acceptable.
yeah. But how hard is that to do is my question.
Yeah,
'Cause-
I mean, I think it's not that tough.
Yeah.
You know, you figure you've got a rock or something, and then your commander, and you just need one other thing at a different amount. So it's not. So the question is not, can I find a spot where I have 3 to 4 permanents? It's like, I might have trouble controlling when that occurs, though.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of downsides to having a draw spell that depends on you being having a developed board state.
Yeah, that's a really good point, right?
Like-
'Cause your board gets blown up, and this doesn't help you recover that well.
No, this won't give you anything unless you have some non-creature stuff. And so that is a major feel bad where you're gonna draw it and be like, this draws me 1 card. I
Yeah.
can't play 3 mana draw 1 card.
Yeah.
But there's also going to be some decks where like maybe your commander makes a token and it's just 3 mana draw 3, 3 mana draw 4, and that feels incredible. Like this sort of goes in a chart a course spot for me where it's like it's cheap, it's sorcery speed, but it draws the cards that I need in the relatively early game, and I'm pretty happy with this if it's 3 mana draw 3.
Yeah, I think so. I think you'll accept 3, but you're hoping for at least 4.
Yeah, I
because
agree.
at 4 it becomes quite efficient. So I think you want to have a path, or at least be able to say, like 75% of the time, I'm expecting to draw 4 of this, and my deck is constituted in a way that that's likely. Not that it has to happen every time, but you have to make up for the times, like you said, when it's only going to draw 2, or you can look at the board and be like, this is going to draw 0, and divination doesn't have that mode. So that I just want to say, one of the good things about draw spells in general is they can sort of draw you out of bad situations. You know, you're not going to hit your 4th land drop or whatever, and this has a tougher time in that situation where you're like, I just need to hit my land drop. I would prefer to like do other things or cast this later, but I'm just going to fall too far behind in this game, and I haven't done that much. And this could be a thing where you're like, I don't have the land drop. I'm going to cast this and draw 1 because it's too early in the game. This is a weird draw spell that's kind of better late and not that good early. And I don't know that I really want that as much. If I want a spell that's good late, I might want it to just be Brain Geyser or something like that, where it's going to be a lot. This is another card where I just had trouble sort of figuring out, weighing it.
I agree. I was trying to figure out. So let's move on to the what decks want it question,
Sure.
because I do think that's the big question here. Is like, yeah, there's certainly upside on this, but where?
Yeah.
And the first thing that I thought of was commanders that make tokens
Yep.
automatically give you 2 mana values. A lot of commanders that make tokens are like 4 mana, I would say, and then you probably have your mana rocks. Then you've got a 2 mana rock, you've got a 4 mana commander, and then you've got a token.
So you're
that
saying,
draws
I'm
you
gonna get
3,
3 most of the time,
and that's
yep.
a pretty minimal board state. That's like most board states.
Yeah.
But it does mean you sort of have to fire off that draw spell as soon as possible, just in case there's a board wipe or something like that.
Right.
And they can remove your commander in response to this, and you draw less, which
That's
is
a really
brutal.
good point. Where they're like, yeah, because then they kind of get a 2-for-1 out of you just by preventing
Yeah.
you from getting the card and killing a card. I put down decks that with a high 1-drop permanent count. So if you've got, maybe 8 to 10 1-drops that are permanents,
Sure.
this becomes a lot better because 1-drops are just the slot early on that you're going to have a lot of 2s and 3s. Most decks do. So if you're saying like, okay, I'm going to play a 1-drop and then my commander's a 2 or 3, and then I'm going to hopefully have a mana rock or something. It's just a lot more likely you're going to have 3 or more if you played a 1-drop. So I thought that could be a spot where you kind of think about it.
That makes sense to me. Any deck that has a lot of permanents just generally.
That's a good point. That's
Something
a really
you
good
wrote
point.
was artifacts. So like artifacts tend to be all artifacts or highly artifacts. Strong creature decks generally are like you could put this in. But normally if I'm playing a heavy creature deck, I want my card draw to be creature based. So I like it most in artifact decks because it's just so it has a lot like some draw. But this can represent a big burst of draw, which is what artifacts really, really want.
And artifacts usually tend to have more 1-drops than most decks,
Right.
and sort of a lot of options as far as along their curve, and tend to sort of fill up the board. And they tend to have some sticky permanents that aren't creatures that are harder to kill. So board wipes and things happen, but they tend to have a few pieces that are still laying around just because of the way. And they make treasures and stuff like that, so you also get the tokens thing. I like what you said about number of permanents in the deck. I don't even think you can run this if you're running 25 or so instants and sorceries, right? Because
Here's
you just
my
don't have
question,
enough
though.
permanents in the deck.
I'm looking at it from my Dragon's Approach deck,
Interesting.
which is strange, but I'm playing Galazeth, which is my commander. So it's an artifact.
Makes
It's an
treasures,
artifact deck, and it's a 4-drop that makes a 0-drop. And I run all the 2 mana rocks to be able to get Galazeth on turn 3. So if I cast a mana rock on 2, which is the plan, I cast Galazeth and make a treasure, and then the next turn I cast a Dragon's Approach and I draw 3 cards.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
That feels pretty good.
Yeah.
And that fits really, really well into the curve. The deck's designed to work around 3 mana sorceries, but that might be sort of a niche case. But that's how I think about this card.
Yeah. I think that makes sense because your commander makes 2 things
Right.
at 2 different CMCs. So
Yeah. It does run a lot of 1-drop permanents as well because
Yeah, so-
they're artifacts that tap for mana.
that makes sense. All right.
Interesting. An interesting card. Curious to see what you guys think of Lunar Insight.
One thing I want to say is it's
Yeah.
in blue. You don't need to work that hard in blue sometimes, so it might very well possibly be like this is just sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, but I don't need that level of variance. I'd
Yeah.
rather have something that's just medium all the time.
That's
and
fair.
blue will give you that option. There's a ton.
Up next is Mossborn Hydra. 2 and a green for a creature elemental Hydra. It's base 0/0 and has trample. This creature enters with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, double the number of +1/+1 counters on this creature. Sweet. I mean, it's Scootsworm, but for counters on one guy, and he's got trample.
Yeah. I don't know that that's the part of Scootsworm that we think of as making it Scootsworm, but it does double.
It is exponential.
Yeah.
You still have to do the math.
It's still only 1 removal spell. And I
Yeah.
think that's the key part of it.
For sure.
Yeah. It's cool, though. I mean, it comes in with 1. You play a fetch land. It goes to
4.
It goes to 2 and then it goes to 4.
Yeah.
So, that can get out of control pretty fast.
Yeah, this reminds it's Managorger Hydra
Kinda.
by another word, sort
Yeah.
of. What I like about it better than Managorger Hydra is you're in a little bit more control
Yes.
over how big it is, and it can kind of start out slow, and then you can have a big turn where you like ramp and play a fetch, and then all of a sudden it's big. Like that is exactly where you sort of want this to work, where Managorger Hydra just gets scarier and scarier and scarier and scarier, and then suddenly you have a 30/30 and you're like, I'm not ready to be this scary. And you still have a Managorger Hydra. But it also is like if you're missing your land drops, then this is a 3-mana 1/1.
Yeah, I mean, if this can only go in landfall decks, right? When we move on to decks that want it, like you have to you can't just put it in a deck that's just going to play lands as normal. You have to have a deck that is putting extra lands to play. It's focused around like land drops, right?
I think you could put this in counters decks. It's like a green base +1/+1 counter deck. You run fetch lands, you run like rampant growths and stuff. I think that's a completely reasonable spot for it.
Okay, so you're playing more into the doubling, and it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So you run that in that deck. My biggest question with this card was like how worth it is it to jump through hoops to get keyword big? Because
I mean, +1/+1 counters is like the plan is keyword big, right?
Yeah, that's true. And I think 3 mana for a 1/1 with 1 counter is not necessarily what those decks want. But it could be fine there. You do have a lot of the synergy. But, you've got other cards in that deck that are saying like, hey, every time I put a counter, let's draw a card, which, of course, I think the draw card is better than the get bigger. I don't know.
I think this is going to see a lot of play because Managorger Hydra sees a lot of play. Bristly Bill sees a lot of play, which is sort of a similar thing. Obviously, you can spread out those counters a little bit more. This is all your counters in one Hydra basket. But if you have a deck that cares about the number of counters being put on something, or if you can move counters from one permanent to another, that gets very interesting with something like this. And I agree with you, though. I think in a landfall deck, this is a trap. Like, this becomes a 16/16 on the turn that you play it, and then somebody removes it, and that's it. Like,
I just would rather my landfall triggers are
make Rampaging Balos
a lot harder for them to deal with a single card in general. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think in decks that just want a big thing, they're sacrificing it for value. Like, it's really good in the new Gitrog monster.
Okay, yeah.
Though, like, sacks a thing and puts a bunch of lands into play. It's huge, and it cares about lands getting put into play. So I guess that's an example of a landfall power matters deck.
I mean, I'm sort of famously, like, every time somebody plays a Mossborn Hydra, I'm like, I never play that card. But then I've been in plenty of games where I'm like, that thing's a problem.
Yeah.
So it's not like they don't actually become problems. They do. It's just not the type of card that I generally play because I'm going to jump through a lot of hoops to make something big or have to wait a certain amount of time. I usually want that power to be spread out in a way that's hard to, with one card just take care of.
Yeah.
But a lot of times people don't take care of that card, and then you're feeling pretty good.
And then you die.
I definitely do.
You're like, I got a removal spell, it's fine. And then they give it hexproof, and then you're dead.
Crap, I wasn't ready for you to have tricks.
That's Mossborn Hydra. It's sweet. It's big.
This next card is way more my speed.
It's so cool.
It's a very cool card. I think this card's going to be quite powerful.
It's 9 lives familiar. This one's been spoiled for a while. It's 1 black for a creature cat. This creature enters with 8 revival counters on it if you cast it. When this creature dies, if it had a revival counter on it, return it to the battlefield with 1 fewer revival counter on it at the beginning of the next end step. Very smart of them to put in that last clause.
Yes,
Thank you.
A little too broken otherwise. Just sack it 9 times in a row. Still, this is a type of card that just is recurable value. It's going to come back 8 more times.
That's awesome. 8's a million.
Yeah.
It might as well be a million.
It feels like a million.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that this does for you. Something I noticed is normally this kind of effect, like this recurable creature, can't block.
Yeah.
This one can.
This one can.
All day.
Yeah.
Forever. Keep coming.
It's great. I mean, that's a great thing to just do with it. And the thing is, the glorious thing about cards like this, no one will attack you.
Yeah.
Because they'll be like, hey, you're just going to block with that stupid cat.
And it comes back.
And so
then I didn't do anything.
It does nothing to you. I'd rather just swing at somebody where like it either will actually get through for the damage or they have to block with something that matters, even if it's a token. Yeah.
It's like a weird ghostly prison. It will play that way.
You just know from experience that tends to be the natural human response to this type of thing. I want to do something that matters. Attacking you feels like it doesn't matter. I'll attack somebody else.
Yeah. I mean, I think this thing's perfect for once per turn dice triggers. It's really great for sacrifice triggers.
Yep.
Like, this is sort of an extreme example, but it's perfect for Corvold because you can sacrifice it 8 times and then you're up permanence, right? Because you're sacrificing the same thing over and over and over again. Obviously, it's great with Skull Clamp.
So good. So good.
It's just 1 mana draw 2 every single turn of yours anyway. It does a lot. So what I wanted to talk about was all of the things that this is repeatable is not just dies.
Right.
It's repeatable ETBs.
Yep.
It's repeatable dies. It's repeatable leaves the graveyard triggers.
That's the one I really like.
It's repeatable putting counters on a thing.
Yep.
Like there's cards that care about all of these. Not to mention it's just a body that can do other things.
It's super efficient for what it does. This 3 mana will get you so much.
Yeah.
That it feels like, it's not going to be hard to figure out how to get this value out of this thing. I'm going to block with it. I'm going to sack it. I'm going to, get a bunch of triggers in other ways for my Aristocrat deck or whatever it is. Yeah, I just love the amount of value all packaged into this 3 mana thing.
Yeah. It feels like Bloodghast, but you can block with it, I guess is the way I've been thinking about it. I really like it with Birthing Pod is what I keep thinking about because you can just keep getting 4-drops, which is like basically the best.
But what we know will happen is you'll go get a 4-drop and then you sacrifice that 4 to go get a 5. And
or you sacrifice it again to go get another 4-drop.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, what'll really happen is you'll just go to whatever the creature is you've determined is the best creature in your deck and you'll get there very fast.
Yeah. I mean, that's Birthing Pod.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Everyone thinks, like, I'm just going to do this. And then they learn after playing the deck 3 times, they're like, I always want to find this one creature and that's the one I'm going to go.
I'm just going to go get shielded. Yeah. This card's awesome. It's great with any sack outlet, basically. It's, like things that care about it leaving the battlefield, like Sir Conrad is really cool because it triggers when it dies and when it leaves the battlefield.
Or
graveyard, excuse me.
Leaves the graveyard, I think, was something I immediately kind of looked at it for because I don't think that deck's quite fully there yet. There haven't been enough pieces. This is another piece, and it's a kind of key piece because we haven't had a creature that will get itself into and out of the graveyard this easily, this many times. Like, they usually cast mana.
There's a couple of them, but there's not a ton. Like Bloodghast and stuff.
Yeah. But again, you do have to do some stuff, though, for those. This one does it. You cast it. If it dies, it brings itself back with no other thing you've done. Yeah. And I like that part of it. Now, it's the once per turn thing to kind of keep it in line, but if you have the Desecrated Tomb type stuff, Sir Conrad was another one you talked about. There's a Tormod and Amzu that are
That's
both
cool.
commanders that kind of do this. And I think I like it when there's like a deck on the horizon and they keep adding little pieces to it. It's like, it's not there, but I think it's going to get there. And this is another piece to it. And I think a pretty key piece.
Yeah, I like this one a lot. I think the coolest commander that I found with this one was Felisa,
Yeah, that's cool.
Fang of Silverquill. It says whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, create X tapped 2/1 white and black Inkling tokens with flying, where X is the number of counters it had on it.
It's pretty nuts with like an Astronaut's Altar or something.
Yeah.
Or any sack outlet that you can repeat because you
Yeah.
just do that. It comes back at end step. You do it again on the next end step. And by the time it gets back to you, you've got what? It's 15, 21, 25, 2-1. Right? Like
That's incredible.
That's insane.
That's so powerful. It's good with Yawgmoth because you can sacrifice it and you can proliferate the counters. There's so many cool things you can do with this cat, and I cannot wait to see how we're using it. I just want to skull clamp it. That's me.
It's good, but you're not taking advantage of it on the other 3 players' turns. So I think, it's,
That's enough.
obviously.
2 cards is for enough.
Yeah,
for me.
Skull Clamp is great, and then it can block. But like, I think you also want to have some other way to, Okay, the next card is Quilled Greatwurm. This is an interesting one. 4 green for a creature worm. It's a 7/7 with trample. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1/+1 counters on it. I like the reminder text here. It must survive to get the counters. And then it says, you may cast this card from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying its other costs. So, notably, you don't have to do damage to the creature doesn't have to deal damage to a player.
Nope.
So any combat damage that it deals, given that it survives, it will get that many. So if a 6/6 gets blocked by a 2/2, it will become a 12/12.
Yeah.
And kill the 2/2, obviously.
Yeah. It's this is sweet. I mean, it's a power doubler that is sort of permanently doubles it. Right? Is the way that I've been thinking about it. It reminds me a little bit of Vigor.
Yep.
Is the best. It's like a 6-mana creature. It doesn't prevent the damage, which is kind of one of the primary benefits of Vigor, but it puts more counters on the creature than Vigor does.
And I would say the outcome of somebody playing a Vigor is generally that you just can't really afford to tangle with it in combat. The good thing about Quilled Greatwurm, though, is that if you don't block it, the thing will get double spit.
Still gets the
So you're
counters,
kind of
yeah.
in this like damned if you do, damned if you don't situation where like,
Right.
I would like to block it, but then it'll get bigger. But if I don't block it, it'll get bigger.
Yep.
What do I do? Yeah.
The biggest issue with this card for me is it puts the counters on after you've dealt the combat damage. So you play your 6/6, you attack with 2 4/4s, you get some counters on them, but you've only so now you have 2 8/8s, but you've only dealt 8 damage.
Yeah.
And
they
then
have
you
to
have
survive,
to wait
right?
for the full rotation. Yeah, they do have to survive combat, so you need a clean attack with those 4/4s anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely clunky. It's very powerful, but the fact that like it's like, what was the Anthem effect from earlier, the artifact?
Yeah, the Fellowship of the Ring. That's not it. I'll find it.
Fellowship of the Ring. I'm
It
pretty sure
puts
that
Fellowship counters on it.
Yeah, when you want your creatures to get bigger, you generally want them to get bigger in that manner. I play this card, they're now bigger, I attack, I get the advantage of them being bigger.
Banner of Kinship.
Manor of Kinship. This one is, I play this card and then I do stuff and they will get bigger from there, but you can kind of see it coming, you can maybe mitigate it in some way. That does inherently make it less powerful.
Yeah.
So the question becomes like, how do you turn that on its head to make it as powerful as you want it to be? I think Double Strike is a pretty good way to do it.
Double Strike is great. It hits, puts all the counters on, and hits
Hits a
bigger
second time.
and now more.
So it really does double the double, and also on the first hit, it gets big enough. So those 4/4s, even if they're swinging into 6/6s, are going to survive.
Yes.
And grow. You know, they'll become 16/16s in that case. So I think if you have Double Strike in your deck or the ability to give Double Strike, then this becomes a lot better. Even First Strike makes it better too, right? Because those 4/4 swing in to the 6/6s, deal 4 on First Strike damage, become 8/8s, and then don't die in the crackback. That's still, it's not as good as the Double Strike thing, but still good.
Yeah, it still means that they survive combat and they're big now. You mentioned extra combats. I do think that that's a really good position to look at this as well, because you're attacking, you get the counters, and you get to use those counters right away on this turn. It's frustrating to play a 6-drop and like to do something, and you're like, I've got all these things. Next turn.
Yeah.
So to be
Please
able
don't
to
kill them.
like
Please don't kill this thing.
it's gonna get twice as big.
Yeah.
Like it's just it just puts huge alarm bells out before it even does the big scary thing. So I like the idea of taking advantage of it to make sure you get the value out of it right away. Otherwise, it's going to be hard competing with just the power doublers that double at the beginning of combat, or stuff like Defiler of Vigor that just when you cast green spells, it puts counters on all your stuff because that's all before combat.
Yeah, unnatural growth you have on here.
Yeah, that's the power doubler. Yeah.
Yeah, this is just like it just does it right and
now.
Yeah, it is the Kinship. What Binding of Kinship?
Banner of Kinship.
Banner of Kinship. Those are Anthem effects that just say, okay, creatures get big, basically now, and I'm attacking with them, and they have the bigness. And this one says...
and they have the bigness.
Yeah, this one says, I promise to give you bigness later.
And they're like, don't, please, less.
If you do this thing. I think the other thing you could think about is if you have Powers Matter stuff in your deck that can take advantage of it post-combat.
For sure, yeah.
So Chandra's Ignition's in your deck. This card becomes a lot better. If you have Greater Good in your deck, becomes a lot better. It's also going to be good in like Selvala, Elena, things that say like the greatest. If you have cards in your deck that say something, the greatest power among creatures you control.
All of that stuff. Yeah,
this becomes a lot better because all of a sudden, and they might not see it coming. You play this, you attack with your 2/4/4s. They're like, all right, they're gonna become 8/8s, whatever. I'll live with it. I'll take my 8 damage. They become 8/8s. We'll deal with them in a second. And then you go, Rishkar's expertise.
Yeah.
Now I've taken advantage of the counters that I got right now. So I think you want a number of ways in your deck that are going to be able to do that as another way to sort of justify putting this card in.
I agree. We haven't really talked about its ability to cast it from the graveyard. It's good. I think it's not as relevant as it looks. Most of the spot removal in Commander is exile-based, or it is like bounce-based. Yeah. There's some destroy stuff, or it's like Chaos Warp, like that kind of thing. There's some destruction.
Chaos Warp troubles it in.
Yeah. So it's gone.
Yeah.
But
there's some destruction and board wipes.
There's some. But the thing about board wipes...
Yeah, it's hard to get counters on a creatures enough to get this back later, yeah.
Exactly. Your whole board is gone, and now all the counters you just made are gone. So you have to now get the counters back up to the 6, remove the counters that you worked really hard to get this thing back into play, and attack and put the counters on it, and then you got the bring the bigness next turn.
Yeah, and you're like, wait, but I'm already big, though.
Why don't I just
have
attack?
The 6 counters, so why don't I just keep those? Yeah.
I'll get this later. I don't think that's as relevant. Sometimes it's going to be good. I think most of the time you're going to find that it's flavor text.
Yeah, so I think, do you think this goes in a +1/+1 counter synergy deck? So if you've got the Hardened Scales and the, what's the Parallel Lives, but for +1/+1 counters?
Doubling Season?
Well, there's that one too, but there's...
it's a Branching Evolution.
Yeah, Branching Evolution. Do you think it's worth it? Because it doesn't solve that problem of, hey, it's later. It's just bigger later than it would be.
It puts a lot of +1 counters on stuff.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
There was a helium balloon in here for just real quick. You didn't see it.
I just did a tiny choke.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a lot of talking.
I just got old for just a tiny minute. I agree. I think Power Matters is a better spot for it, where you can take advantage of that right away, or like an Ansrag that gives you multiple combats, like that kind of thing is where this is going to feel better than just like it's another way to get stuff big, but a little slower than you'd like.
Yeah.
All right. We've mentioned it already. It's Raise the Past. 2 white for a sorcery. Return all creature cards with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield.
It's good.
It is.
There's a lot of little creatures now that are good.
Yep. That was the first thing I thought of, is just like creatures are really good now.
Yep.
Like there's so many 2-drops that you got to get rid of Ledger Shredders, and you've got to get rid of like Fairy Masterminds, and you've got to get rid of
Esper Sentinels
yep. and Douthie Voidwalkers and
Hare Apparents now, and
we're not even mentioning just like the 2-drops that sack themselves to get value, like Sakura Tribe Elders or Selfless Spirits.
Yeah.
The one I keep mentioning apparently is Blood Tithe Harvester. I really like this card. There's a lot of really like Psychic Frog.
Yeah.
Really, really powerful creatures that are cheap now, that this just says reanimate half your graveyard, and that's busted.
Yeah, that's a question I have, is how many 1 and 2 drops do you think you need to have to make this a viable thing in your deck?
It's an interesting question. I mean, like 15? Is that crazy? If you get 3 things back with this, that feels great.
You have to get 3, I think.
Yeah.
Because if you only get 2, you could have just cast 2 for the 4 mana.
Yeah,
So you didn't... I mean, it's good to recur things because you
Right.
get to use them again, but
Yeah.
you wouldn't be up on mana. In fact, you could be down on mana.
Right, depending on what you reanimate. Yeah, 3 is when you start to feel mana positive and it starts to feel very good. So I think like 15 is reasonable, and you have some expectation that you're going to be sacrificing things, or you've got a lot of like key pieces like Blood Artists and Zulaport Cutthroats that you're like, I need these on board for my stuff to work.
Mm-hmm. Or maybe if your commander is 2 or 1 also, that as a thing you could just be like, all right, I'll put it in the graveyard here and get a couple of things out with my commander, so that gives you 1 card that you know you're going to get. I mean, it's obviously good in Shadowborn Apostles or Hare Apparent or something like that, because you're going to have 30 cards.
Yeah.
And I think if you're 20 plus 1 and 2 drop creatures, then it's really good.
Then it's really busted.
Good.
I think 15, you start to look at it, and then
you probably have 15 or around that number still want some other mechanic in your deck that's allowing you to put creatures. So you're self-milling, you're looting.
Graveyard,
you've got a little bit of something going on to allow you to put some stuff into that graveyard.
Yeah. Life gain decks, I think, should look at it. There's a lot of, like, all the Soul Sisters are just, your deck works a million times better if you have them in play, and there's a ton of them now. So that is another great archetype to look at.
Yeah, as far as what decks want it, there are a bunch of decks now that kind of say, hey, play...
Bunch of little guys.
So like Luris or something like that. Delny.
Yeah. I mean, the Tyam is one I thought of.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
Obviously, it doesn't get your 3 mana stuff, but you get a lot of 2s and 1s.
Yeah, Teshar. There's a bunch now.
Yeah.
And this is becoming more and more of an archetype. So if you're in a deck that's dedicated to that, you're likely to have 25 plus small creatures. And then like we said, it becomes pretty amazing.
Yeah, I made a very annoying Celestine the Living Saint deck that was just based on looping 1, 2, 3 drops from my graveyard by gaining a little bit of life. And that's the kind of deck that this goes in.
All right.
Up next
is Rite of the Dragoncaller. 4 red for an enchantment. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying.
I mean, all right. There's a lot of things that do this that are kind of expensive. Shark Typhoon, Metallurgic Summonings are like similar, but they care about the mana value of the spell being cast. They've made a couple recently that don't care about the mana value, but give you like pretty sizable tokens, like Lord of the Nazgul gives you 3/3s. Yep. And Eris, Roar of the Storm gives you 4/4 dragons, but those have prowess.
Yep.
So we've seen more of this kind of effect, and 5/5 is the biggest we've seen. What I really like about it is it doesn't care about mana value, because the kind of like decks that want this effect want to cast a ton of little 1-drops.
Yeah, for the most part.
And in those decks, Shark Typhoon isn't as good because you're like, I make a bunch of 1/1 sharks.
It's good, but you kind of think of it as like every time I cast a spell, I make a 1/1 flyer.
Right.
Which you'd play, what is it, Murmuring Mystic or whatever.
Yeah, the 4-drop,
Yeah, but this is nice because it pays you the same amount regardless of the size of the spell.
Right.
So in some ways better than Shark Typhoon, right?
Yeah, I think in Stormy style decks, I would consider this better than Shark Typhoon. In like control style decks, I think Shark Typhoon's better because it has the cycling ability, obviously. And like
cycling ain't nothing.
If you're playing a control deck, you're not really tapping out for a 6-mana enchantment.
I think I've probably cycled Shark Typhoon as many times as I've cast it.
Yeah, it's mostly
one of those
flash
few
shark,
cards that you do cycle. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you made a really good point, which is just that this slot is pretty clogged.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things filling this particular slot, which is basically like I pay you dividends for casting instants and sorceries.
Right. There's a lot of big, cool 6-mana enchantments.
They are all at 6 mana, yeah.
That's like Arcane Bombardment is awesome.
Yeah.
You like store them in there and then you cast a whole bunch of them, and 1,000-Year Storm does a similar thing, and those are really sweet. And this sort of lives in that same space except for you make a dragon. So what I would consider this is like sort of a simplified win con for Storm decks that just don't want to mess with the crap.
Arcane Bombardment is like confusing.
It is confusing. It takes a lot to resolve. You're casting Opt like a million times.
Yeah,
You're like, I don't need to
Storm
cast.
is a lot of like counting.
Right. So this is just like, I make a 5/5.
Yeah.
And 5/5s will kill you.
Yeah, eventually, I promise they will.
The 5/5s will get it done at some point. The other thing that I do like about this is you can cast, it's really good with instants. So you can cast like 3 or 4 instants on end step and untap with like 20 power.
Yeah, and they don't
15
know.
power.
They don't get to see it.
Yeah.
That I think is quite powerful, when you get to pass the turn, have some mana open, and it's like, do they have one thing or do they have 4 things? And if it's 4, it's totally different than 1. But what do I do about that?
Right.
Yeah, and you get to be like, instant before my turn, I get to
Cast Frantic Search.
Yeah.
And one other spell.
Yeah.
And even that's 10 power
and then
in
draw
there.
something and probably cast something else.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
So I can see the place where this exists. I think this is just like a lot of win cons, this is flavor to taste, right? Like it depends on how you want your Stormy style Spellslinger deck to win the game. And if it's 5/5 dragons, cool.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to be roughly equivalent to most of the other 6 mana enchantments payoffs that there are.
Yeah.
And this, within a percentage point or two. So what decks want it? I put decks that have 20 to 25 plus instants and sorceries that are at 1 or 2 CMC.
Yeah.
If you've got, and there's a lot of those decks, a Spellslinger deck, then this is an option. But is it better than what you already have in there right now? It's possible the answer is no.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is better than like a Gutter Snipe.
Probably not. Gutter Snipe's 3 mana.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
I wouldn't
so
be
expensive.
replacing a Gutter Snipe with this.
Yeah.
I'm replacing a 1,000-Year Storm or a Shark Typhoon or something like that. But Gutter Snipe is not in the running for what I'm replacing with.
For sure.
Yeah, there's such a huge difference between 3 mana and the turn I
6,
go off.
yeah.
I play this on the turn I go off. It's a lot harder to play Rite of Dragoncaller the turn I go off because I'm down 3 more mana than with the Gutter Snipe.
Yeah.
And a lot of times Storm decks are just a calculation of like, I do this, I end at this much mana. Do I have enough left to keep going?
Yep. It's interesting. I think, again, it's a taste thing.
Yeah.
Up next is Scrawling Crawler.
I like this card.
3 mana artifact creature Phyrexian construct. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card. That's your upkeep. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player loses 1 life. It is a 3/2.
A lot going on with this one little card. I like it.
For 3 mana?
Yeah.
There's a lot to think about here. Like you said, it has like a Howling Mine kind of effect, but it's not extra on their turn. It's extra on yours.
It's better than Howling Mine.
Right.
Because, if I cast Howling Mine, nothing happens for me. I pass, and Rachel immediately draws a card. And then Jimmy draws a card, and then player number 4 draws a card, and then I draw a card. And if the Howling Mine's still around, there's a lot of scenarios where like somebody else got advantage and you didn't because it got destroyed.
Yep.
Yeah, I hate when that happens.
And this says like, okay, we're all going to draw our extra card at the same time on my turn.
And I'm going to be the first one to get to use mine.
Right. But the other side of this is a damage engine, and it deals damage on your turn, which some commanders care about, and it does damage on your opponent's turn, which some commanders care about. So this will deal 2 damage per rotation to each player. Notably, it only...
Minimum. That's a minimum.
Yeah.
They're going to draw their own cards, too.
I mean, notably, like it says whenever an opponent draws a card, so it punishes theirs. It isn't based on yours, where a lot of like wheel decks are like, whenever I draw a card, everybody takes damage.
Yeah.
This is only when your opponents draw extra cards. But man, that's a lot of different things to consider what decks this could possibly go into.
It's also just a lot of mana worth of effects. If you compare it to Howling Mine, that's 2 mana, and then you compare it to Underworld Dreams, which is the classic drain your opponents when they draw, that's 3 mana. That should be 5 mana.
Right, and some of that is black, black, black.
Yeah, and this is all of a sudden 3. It does feel like aggressively costed for what it's doing for you.
Yeah, like Stormfist Crusader is a red and black card that does basically this, but it doesn't do the repeatable damage thing. It's just everybody draws on your upkeep and drains them for 1.
Yeah.
So it is better than that for 1 more mana and in colorless. It's very effective.
Yeah. I think it's quite a bit better because it doesn't punish them for their other draws.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just 1 damage flat. Yeah.
I want to just mention that this is the combination of both an engine and a payoff. And anytime that happens in Commander, it's very powerful. Like it gives you the juice that fuels the fire.
Yep.
And
It's
they've been
both
doing that
sides
a lot.
of the coin.
They've been doing that a lot in cards, and I think it really raises the power level of decks because you don't have to find both halves. It's right here.
Yep. This card. Well, let's talk about what decks want it because I think that'll help us.
It's so
talk about
many.
it. Yeah, and that's the thing. When you look at this card, you're like, oh, there's a bunch of decks that fit that are doing parts of what this wants to do. So there's wheel decks.
Yep.
So the classic Nekusar deck, which this is just the most Nekusar-like card that you could come up with. It's drawing and punishing draw, and that's what Nekusar does. So yeah, there's also just Braylon and Shabraz. There's Cyrus. These are decks that just run all the wheels that they can and are just going to punish you for drawing cards and make the opponent draw as many cards. They're going to run the Teferi's puzzle boxes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And this is just exactly on that plan in a more efficient package than most of the other pieces.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I like about this card the most is it goes really well in group hug decks that are not trying to like mill their opponents.
Right.
But like Kami of the Crescent Moon has been a very popular commander for years, and it's just a Howling Mine. And generally the way that deck wins is by decking players, which is very difficult, especially when you're giving them extra cards. And this says like, okay, I'm going to give you extra cards, but I'm
there's a
also going to
damage
attack your
component.
life total.
Yeah.
And it's colorless because blue doesn't have this ability to punish people like
You kind of
that.
got Psychosis Crawler, and that's kind of it.
And that's only when you draw.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Is it's like, well, I'm going to make everybody draw, and when I draw, it's going to deal damage. So it's
Yeah.
kind of, and this is a reference to it, right? Scrawling Crawler.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now you've got this secondary piece that punishes their draw, and punishing their draw is a lot better. Well, it can be better in that the incidental things they're doing will also hurt them. Like somebody casts a Consecrated Sphinx. Well, yeah,
You're going to take some damage.
it does make it so a lot of cards in their hand are like a lot worse.
So I really like it for that style of decks. I mean, we mentioned a lot here with like Kami, but it's really great in Heliod, the Radiant Dawn.
Yep.
Because it's colorless. So you can, with that cost
Cast it
reduction,
for
you can
free.
flash it in.
Yep.
And then
And it makes everybody draw more cards, so then
your stuff
get more
costs less.
mana. Yep.
But like, there's all of that, which you picture, like draw matters type decks. And then it's also really good in damage matters type decks.
Yeah.
Like Teysa Opulent Oligarch is the one you played on, it's the MKM Game Nights.
Yep.
And it cares about how many players lost life on your end step. And this just does it. It gives everybody an extra card. It damages everybody. And you're like, yeah, it gives them extra cards. But this is both sides of your engine right here. This
Exactly.
is very powerful.
Yeah, there's Belby's another one that just says like, you know, you get mana or you get some sort of payoff or reward for having damaged your opponents, and this just gives the damage. Rakdos is a favorite of yours.
I mean, I've run Stormfist Crusader and Rakdos for ages, and
Yeah.
this is better than that.
All these decks will run something that's just like, hey, at whatever time, instep, upkeep, whatever, deal 1 damage to everybody or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and so this is sort of a better version of that. It's better, again, because they will draw their own cards. They will want to do that. Their deck will have Esper Sentinels and Rhystic Studies and things like that, right? That damage will stack up even more.
Yeah. I mean, and on top of that, like we've talked about a couple of decks where you want to deal damage on your turn, but it's also good in like the new Valgavoth Harrower of Souls, which cares about dealing damage to them on their turn.
Yeah, because they have to draw their
as
card
well.
in turn.
So it just does so much for a colorless 3-drop.
Yeah, you look for cards that are just like it seems like it should cost more mana. This should be. This feels like it should cost 4.
Yeah, Psychosis Crawler's 5.
Yeah, and there's a big difference. It's 25%
Yeah.
discount on what we think it should cost. So yeah, I like this card a lot. I mean, it's very powerful. I don't know if I like the fact that it has both sides of the coin on it, but
Yeah. It's fun. It gives extra cards. He's got a weird head.
I will say that Howling Mine effects are good in games. There's a point of you can hit a tipping point where they become worse, but 1 or 2 is really good in games. It means people hit their land drops, they do a lot of stuff. It creates less non-games.
It makes for big games too,
Yeah,
where like
exactly.
people get to cast cool stuff and
They have answers. You see the best out of every deck.
Yeah.
And I do generally think those make for good games. And whenever we have like on-camera or on-stage games where a Howling Mine or some similar effect type gets played, you can really notice that like, oh, there's a lot more juice to this game.
Yeah. Up next is, I've seen this all over Twitter. It's Sire of 7 Deaths. It's a 7-mana creature, Eldrazi. It's a 7/7 with 7 keywords. First strike, vigilance, menace, trample, reach, lifelink, and ward, pay 7 life. He loves
lot
a
of
7.
stuff. We had 9 lives on another card and we got 7 deaths on this one.
Okay.
Why the big
First-
sigh?
Because looking at this stack of keywords is like, okay, first strike and vigilance. Okay. Menace and trample.
Yep.
Reach and lifelink.
Yep.
It's like half aggressive, half defensive, but it has vigilance, so it can do both.
Yep.
This thing is a stone wall
Yeah.
in combat. Like
It
you
is.
cast this, you're like you have a 7/7 reach lifelink creature
Yeah,
with vigilance.
You can't get past it, and it gains life too, so it's going to help, sort of stabilize or come back in a lot of games. And the ward is a pain in the butt. Although ward 7 life, I'd say, is better than ward like 3 mana or something.
Yeah, ward 3 sack 3 things or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing about this card to me is how defensive it feels for an Eldrazi. They tend to be like, mess you up, kill your stuff, like
Annihilator,
you sack your
I
stuff.
attack you,
and
and-
this one's like, I keep you safe.
Yeah. Well, you just can't get past me.
Yeah, I'm just big.
It's 7 mana.
Yeah.
7 mana is a lot. Let's look at some other creatures that sit in the 7 mana slot. We do play 7 mana cards, but
We do. And that was what I wanted to look at. It was like, is this better than the 7 mana cards we play?
so there's Meteor Golem,
Sure.
Platinum Angel,
Yeah.
Threefold Thunderhulk. Man, that card's a house.
I've loved this card.
yeah, every time it hits the board, I'm like, geez.
Twins of Discord is an example of like a similar Eldrazi. It's whenever you attack, choose odd or even creatures with mana value of that quality can't block this turn, and each other colorless creature you control has Bloodthirst too, which we all remember. Bloodthirst, right?
Right, I'm 100% know what that does.
even like a Chroma's Memorial does a very similar thing to this in my mind, and we do play like a Chroma's Memorial.
Not so much these days, but we used to.
I don't know. People still play Chroma's Memorial.
I haven't seen one in years, I feel like. It's so much mana.
I just play creatures that naturally have these keywords.
Exactly.
So I was looking at those and I was like, I don't know. These cards immediately impact the board in a lot. I guess with the exception of Platinum Angel, which we don't play as much.
You need a reason to play it, yeah.
Yeah. So I was trying to think of like, where does this go? Because Meteor Golem's here to be like brought in and out of the graveyard in artifact decks. The Threefold Thunderhulk usually has some sort of additional synergy with +1 counters or like tokens. So what deck wants like this big defensive Eldrazi? And I can't really think of one.
Yeah, you wrote this down, which I thought was smart.
Yeah.
Which is just keyword matters.
Yeah.
Decks. There's not a lot of them. But it is an archetype that does exist. The sort of OG of this that I can remember is Odric, Lunarch Marshal.
Yeah.
It's just they just want a lot of keywords on their creatures because they give all the keywords to the other creatures.
The thing about Odric, though, is like it's a white aggro deck, so your curve tends to be a lot lower. Like you're not really casting a 7-drop. So the keywords matters card that I thought of.
Yeah, you do want all that stuff, though.
They're good keywords.
Yeah.
I think they're as good as it gets, honestly, in terms of like combat keywords.
Yeah.
I thought of like Indominus Rex is the best place for it. This is the deck that's most excited because you discard it and you get that many keywords and you draw that many cards.
So you don't actually have to pay the 7.
You don't pay 7. It's there to be discarded. So that makes a lot of sense to me. But like in terms of just like my Achroma deck that gives everything +1/+1 for each keyword they have, my top end's Achroma. Like I don't really want to cast this card.
You don't want another 7-drop. I put down decks that have a high density of colorless threats or that create a lot of colorless mana. So Rakdos is one of these. Belby is one of these. Animar, Megatron. Those are decks that you jump through some hoops, but then you make a lot of colorless mana, and that gets you to be like, oh, I can cast certain things for free. I want a lot of things in my deck that have no colored mana symbols in them to just, I can always drop them. But then the question is like, is this better than Ulamog's Crusher or something in those cases? There's already enough like creatures about this power level that exist for around this mana cost that like, does Belby want this card? It feels like kind of no.
Like Citywide Leveler, I think you probably play before this because it just has an immediate impact when you cast these spells. So that is the interesting thing for me. Like I can think of a deck where it goes or one or two. And if you're like, oh, I don't have all the Titans, they're super expensive, then maybe this is one that you consider. I don't know how budget it's going to be though, because it's like, people have been talking about it for Modern. It's 7 mana, so it goes well with
it's a mythic, right?
It's a mythic. So I just don't know if it's going to see a ton of play in Commander because I think it's going to be expensive for other reasons and not as powerful as other expensive effects like it.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, the next card is Sphinx of Forgotten Lore. It is 2 blue for a 3/3 Sphinx with flash and flying. Whenever this creature attacks, target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost.
Okay.
So Echoes of Snapcaster Mage, Torrential Gearhulk, 2 of my favorite cards of all time.
Yeah, I thought of Backdraft Hellkite, which they keep putting in precons, but is pretty unplayable because it can't attack the turn that you play it.
Yeah, this is a card you put down. I was like, what does that card do? I don't even...
Exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And we don't... Like, they keep printing this card.
It has to have flash is what they're thinking changes the equation here.
I think it being flash is a big deal. I think it being in blue is a big deal.
True.
So there is a difference that I think tips this toward playable. It's also one mana cheaper, but like, is it better than Lear, Disciple of the Drowned, which just like lets you cast instant or sorceries from your graveyard? I don't know. You can't counter anything with Lear, but you can't really counter anything with the Sphinx either because it gives it flashback until end of turn.
I just checked. I was like, does this say until the end of your next turn? That would be a little bit different.
Yeah. It's nope.
And that's the thing about Snappy and Torrential Gearhulk is you often use them to target a counterspell. And this doesn't have that mode.
Yeah.
But the flash does mean flashing on the end step. It has pseudo haste, attack, give something flashback. There's value there. And the fact that it's repeatable, right?
Yeah.
Is pretty powerful. I mean, in theory.
In theory, I think this card is interesting. And if you're really into like flash threats and you're moving at instant speed and you've got like these draw spells in your graveyard, then maybe you look at this card. And I just didn't want it to get overlooked because Backdraft Hellkite is like not a very playable card.
Right.
Because this has flash, because this is cheaper, because you can do this on end step and get that attack trigger in, I think the Sphinx can see more play in Commander.
Yeah, it's a little more reasonable.
Yeah.
what decks want it? Decks that just have a lot of instants so that you're holding your mana open and this can be one of your choices?
I would think so. I mean, I like it for proactive instants and sorcery-based decks. Obviously,
it has to be. It can't be counterspells, right? Because you can't target those with this trigger.
Yeah. So, like, some Octavia decks kind of do this. Unfortunately, it exiles the cards from your graveyard, but usually you have more than 8 instants and sorceries in your graveyard. So you're using your unblockable cantrips. You're just casting cantrips for free. It can get you a lot of repeatable value throughout the game. So, curious to see if you're playing Sphinx of the Forgotten Lore. I'm glad that they're playing with this idea.
Maybe it'll be like the Vidalcanori thing, where we just see them slightly make it better until finally...
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, they made the
It took like 3 or 4 iterations before they were like...
This is it. We got it now.
They're like, we can take a ban off. Okay, we can make it a little bit smaller. Okay, I can affect it. Like, it's,
They're playing
Chip
with
away
it.
at it.
Yeah, it's cool to see them trying that. This next card I love.
Yeah, this card's
It's Spinner of Souls. 2 and a green for a Spider Spirit. It's a 4/3 with reach. They flip the power and toughness on this spider. It's usually...
It's got more bite than web, I guess.
Yeah. It says, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you may reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. It's Evolutionary Leap.
It is. With no mana cost.
With no mana cost. I've been arguing for Evolutionary Leap for ages. I think this card's undervalued in decks, and it's green to sacrifice a creature to get this effect.
Yep.
There's some big differences, obviously. Evolutionary Leap has the built-in sack outlet, so you can fuel it a little bit better. Spinner of Souls, it doesn't trigger off of tokens.
Right.
I think is a
That's kind of a
big deal. But this is sweet, like board protection is the first thing I thought of.
Yeah, if you just have like 3 creatures and this, if they board wipe, you'll at least refill your hand.
Yeah, you'll draw like 3 or 4 non-token creatures from your deck.
Which is strong.
Yeah.
It's just also just a key creature dies and you always get a card draw out of it is pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It's kind of reverse Guardian Project in some ways if you think about it that way. Now you're going to draw specifically a creature,
which is good.
But I think later in the game that's good, but earlier in the game you might want to be able to draw lands or other things off of it. But still, this doesn't ask a lot of you, right? It's a 4/3 reach for 3. It's
already
pretty efficient.
Busted. Yeah,
it's pretty efficient. And then it just gives you value as things die. Evolutionary Leap, I think, is good, but you often are like, well, I don't know exactly when all my stuff's going to die, and I don't need sack outlet, so maybe I tapped out, and then they cast the board wipe, and you don't get the full value.
Sure.
Or like, I only have a couple extra green floating around. It's good to get some mana, but I'm not going to get no stuff for all my creatures when they died or whatever. And this is just like, no, I just do my thing.
Yeah.
Just put it out there.
I don't want people to look at this and get lost in the text. This says, whenever a non-token creature you control dies, draw a spell.
Yep.
That's great. That's a great line of text.
Yep.
Like, it's draw a creature.
Yep.
But
that's
like
still good.
you just draw gas after a board wipe. It's great in an aggressive green deck that wants to commit stuff to the board, and it's a huge body in itself.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is really good and really, it's hard to screw it up.
Yeah.
Do you have 30 creatures in your deck? Okay, this card's going to be really good.
It's obviously best in Golgari decks where you're trying to like loop creatures in and out of the graveyard. It's really great with 9 Lives Familiar.
It becomes really good if you're going to reassembling Skeleton, 9 Lives Familiar, Bloodghast. Yeah, if you're going to do this thing where like, I'm going to recur the same creature or similar creatures in and out for other value with sack outlets thing. And the spinner's just like, cool. When you do that, would you like to just draw a creature card? And you're like, yes, I'll do that
thank
too.
you.
Yeah.
It turns this like card replacement into actual card advantage, which is when it starts to feel really, really busted. So if you're doing some loop-de-doop-de sack loops, definitely take a look at this spider. It's really cool.
But I do think it is the type of card that's just like, hey, listen, if you have a very creature-dense deck that's in green, which they tend to be, this could just deserve a spot just from pure value that it gives you alone. Just the return on investment on this is going to be very high.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet. Those are the cards we're going to talk about from the Foundation's main set. We did have 2 cards we wanted to talk about from Foundation's Jumpstart. They're fairly straightforward, which makes sense, but they are very powerful. Starting with Scythecat Cub. Ooh, we got it. 1 and a green for a creature cat with trample. It is landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. If this is the second time this ability has resolved this turn, double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature instead. Whew, smells like a couple of creatures we've gotten recently.
Smells kind of,
like the one we just talked about.
We talked about this episode.
Yeah. It's Bristly Bill.
on a cat that's not legendary. It doesn't have the activated ability to double, so you're a little less in control of it, but it is a lot more free to double the spells.
Has trample too, which I think is kind of a big deal.
For sure. If
When you've
Bristly
got
Bill had
big,
trample,
you want trample.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think this card's just great. Like, it has trample. You can double the counters if you're ramping with lands or just cracking a fetch land. If you're running Bristly Bill, you're certainly looking at Scythecat Cub.
Yeah, I think you still want to be tending towards landfall decks. I don't think this is probably going in decks that like can't get extra lands into play because you really need to hit that second trigger to double.
Sure.
So you might be able to get there if you're a 1/1 counter deck with a lot of fetch lands.
Yeah.
And you can count on it. But otherwise, I think you really want that second trigger.
I think that's reasonable. I think it's a slam dunk in decks like Oboon, where that's landfall
So
and
good in
+1/+1
Oboon.
counters. It's
Yeah.
like, and you can double it, and the lands have trample, right? It's like
Yep.
something correct. If you're doing a +1/+1 counter deck that we talked about that has a lot of effects that puts counters onto creatures to trigger those abilities, this is a great way to do that. That feels very free. Just putting a counter on the creature you want whenever you want to, either by playing a land or by cracking a fetch land, is very good and is why Bristly Bill is so good. But yeah, you do want to be putting a lot of lands into play and making sure that your ramp is land-based.
Yeah, you just want to have a good chance to get that double trigger, not just the plus. Because if it's not good enough, I don't think if it's just like, hey, when you play a land, get a 1/1 counter.
Yeah. I think that is fair because we don't really play like the enchantment that does it that you can like channel.
It's just not enough power added to your board over the course of a game. The doubling is what puts it into the category of like, oh, that's crazy. Because sometimes I play a land, put a 1/1 counter, I play a second land, get 8 1/1 counters right now.
I mean, it is a 2-drop.
Yeah,
like
true.
You could get to a minor amount of ability. Like the crazy thing
But if
about
it's a
this,
2-drop on turn 5, it's only going to be a 5-drop or whatever, unless you've been able to do the double thing.
yeah, I can see it going in like +1/+1 counter decks where you're trying to get counters on the board early. Like there's definitely something to be said for a cheap +1/+1 counter engine. It goes really well with the next creature we're going to talk about, which is also a 2-drop. Remember the Raise the Pass we were talking about before? This is Generous Pup, 1 and a white for a creature dog with vigilance. Whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on Generous Pup, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. This ability only triggers once per turn. Thank goodness. So
these two work really good together. Yeah.
play a land, put a counter on the pup, put a little...
On everything?
Yeah, I guess it's a DIY Felidar Retreat.
Yeah. Which Felidar Retreat's broken.
Is really
but it's
good,
on a
yeah.
2-drop.
On a 2-drop.
A pair of 2-drops,
Yeah. But this ability is great. If you can divvy out +1/+1 counters, if your commander is doing that specifically, you're going to take a long, hard look at Generous Pup.
Yeah, I think this one wants +1/+1 counter decks that are trying to go wide.
For sure.
Because you want to take advantage of getting as many counters of that. So you want, 5-6 creatures when you do it. So I wrote down like Shadrix as a pretty good one.
Yeah, because that does +1/+1 counters and
Going
makes
wide.
tokens.
Yeah, exactly.
Any deck that's doing +1/+1 counters and has like multiple things in play, like Lenore Autumn Sovereign is one I thought of at the beginning of combat on your turn. Put a +1 counter on up to one target creature, dog. Then if you control a creature with different powers, draw a card.
Yeah.
So normally you have Coven set up pretty easily in that deck, and you can just put all the counters on every single turn. Is very powerful. Okay, that's
Those
the
are the
dog.
two jumpstart, the dog and the cat?
The dog and the cat. Those
Yeah.
are they. I wanted to talk about them because they're very
Those are
powerful.
they.
But not much to say about them other than like if you're putting +1 counters on stuff.
They're
you
give
should
them a
probably
look.
you should probably look.
Yep.
Cool. That's
All right.
it. That's what we're talking about from Foundations.
That's all. Is that all? Who'd have thought that the sort of, modern day core set would have so many cards we would talk about? I like the design. I think there's also something about being in the happy place of like, it just feels like old Magic.
It does. It's the very familiar art, familiar characters, familiar effects. There's no keywords that we're surprised to see here. There's nothing that you have to explain. I also really like a set that is dedicated to spelling out some of the keyworded stuff.
Yeah.
Because we've shortcutted a lot now. So looking at cards can be difficult if you're new to the game. So I'm a huge fan of Foundations. I love the design on the set, and I love that there's cards for invested players as well. Before we go, let's talk about what our favorite cards were that we talked about today.
Okay, well, Fae Trickster,
Yeah.
to the surprise of no one, was probably my favorite.
We got to get an altar with you on it.
Yeah. But I did really like Homunculus Horde. I think it was probably my second favorite. And then I wanted to give honorable mentions to Scrawling Crawler and Spinner of Souls.
Yeah.
Which were also, and then both of yours, I see them down here. I would also have put on my honorable mentions, but you already chose them, so I won't steal your thunder.
Yeah.
But, man, I will say, we have been doing, in the 99s. We've kind of gotten in this rhythm where you and Jimmy do the commanders from the set, and you and I do the in the 99s. And so it's like 2 years now, probably, of us doing these episodes. And I think in the 2 years' time, I don't think there's been a set where I had 6 cards that I really legitimately were like, these could be on my favorite list. In fact, to be candid, I think for a number of sets this year, I was having trouble even just picking one that I really liked. There was a lot of hey, there's good stuff in here, but nothing that I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. I'm really excited about that. And
I think it's because they're just general effects that we like in these colors. Like they've watered down. They're just good green effects and good blue effects and good white effects. And it's not like you have to have a graveyard and a +1/+1 counter deck.
Yeah.
It's a lot less specific than what we've seen in the standard sets because they have to get creative with keywords or with abilities these days.
And to be fair, I want them to be careful with more general broad effects because they tend to go into become staples more likely to become staples, in which case they become more ubiquitous. So I don't want this to happen all the time, but I'm pleasantly surprised because I think when I heard about Foundations, and probably a lot of people feel this way, if you've been playing for Magic for a long time, is like, man, I didn't know if it would be for me. I didn't know, I'm glad there's products out there, and I think there should be to teach people how to play and that are for beginners, but that often means that like, hey, that's not something that I'm necessarily going to enjoy. But I look at the set and I'm like, this looks sweet, and I'm actually excited to play a lot of these cards and draft it.
Yeah, I am very excited to draft this set.
Okay, but I want you to talk about your 2 cards because they're also awesome.
I couldn't decide on this one. I've been a big fan of 9 Lives Familiar since it was spoiled. I love the design on it. It's flavorful. It's powerful. I can imagine 1,000 ways to use it and have it be mechanically like really interesting and flavorfully interesting in a cat as well. So I'm really excited about that card. And I had, we have to mention Hare Apparent. You and I are a big fan of decks that let you play the same card over and over and over again. It lets you do some really weird mechanical stuff. You get to employ some cards that don't get played in Commander very often. And Hare Apparent, I'll be honest, when I saw the soldiers from Assassin's Creed, I was like, is that the white one?
Yeah.
That one's so boring.
Yeah.
It gets a legendary artifact into play.
Immediately was like, I'm going to pretend that doesn't exist.
I don't want to,
Yeah.
And it's, there's a lot of people that like it, and that's for them. I was just like, this is bad and hard to make work, and you just get Thrumming Stone. And then I saw the rabbit and was like, okay, I'm fine, never mind.
Yeah, the rabbit it's super fun. And I would love particularly about that card, I think there's going to just be a lot of different angles you can take with it.
Yeah.
It's all going to kind of culminate and you have a lot of rabbits and, you hop on over and kill them, but how you get to that point will probably be a little bit different.
A little different every
that's
time.
Cool.
All right.
Most powerful card in the 99? I found this to be incredibly easy.
Yeah, we agreed on one of them. It was the card that when I saw it on in our folders, I went, oh no!
Yeah.
It's Blasphemous Edict. Yeah.
We're going to see that card probably more than any other card on this list, I believe.
Yeah.
We've been wrong in the past. One Ring.
Yeah.
Which we had as the second best card in the set. So maybe you'll be right about what you have. I only listed 1, but she listed 2.
I listed 2.
But it's going to be hard to imagine a world where Blasphemous Edict is just not kind of everywhere.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
My runner-up was Banner of Kinship. This is the overrun for tokens or typal strategies. I mean, this card's just great. Yep. It's exactly what these kind of decks have been waiting for a long time, especially the ones that are not green-based. So I think we'll see a lot of it. I think it'll be very popular. It's got little mice on it. I'm going to die to it a lot.
I'm going to die to it the same amount that I've died to Beastmaster Ascension or,
Which is lots.
Yeah. Craterhoof type. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's just another Triumph of the Horde. It's like, Yep. Which is, those cards are good. You need those cards. And
in colorless.
Yeah. That's what I mean. It's like, in the non-greens, I'm going to die to this one. Or it was Coat of Arms maybe before.
Yeah, which,
Cathar's Crusade, which is annoying to keep track of. So
everybody's breathing such a sigh of relief to be like, Coat of Arms out.
Yeah. Bring in, yeah.
New one.
It's basically the same thing, but I don't have to, do think
all
so
the
hard.
Yeah, for sure. Those are they. I'm excited. Something we didn't mention for Homunculus Horde that I think I was really excited about when I saw that card was it's a funny win con for blue.
Yeah.
Blue's such a fun card to play, and all of the win cons are miserable. You're like, I deck you, and you've got no, and it always feels a little chilly and calculated.
Right.
And Homunculus Horde is such a silly, flavorful way to be like, Blue's fun too. Blue can be fun to play.
I just exponentially make these. Like, it's 2, then 4, then 8, then 16, then 32. Do I have it?
Yeah. Can I do it? I think it's very fun. So, to the listeners, what do you guys think about Foundations? Are you as excited about it as we are? And what new cards did we talk about today that you're like, I have got to go pick up a copy for my Commander deck?
Or did we miss any? Are there cards that we didn't talk about? They're like, how could you not talk about this card? This card is awesome.
Yeah, there was a couple that are just like, it's,
We always do our best, and, Rachel does most of this work, to be fair, of sort of going through and trying to predict what we think are going to be sort of the most important cards for you to know about, so that when you sit down to play, you have some idea about I heard about this card, or I've seen it. It works for us as well. But we can't talk about 100 cards, so there's always this tug and pull between like, hey, listen, the episode's already going to be 2.5 hours or whatever it is. We don't want it to be 5 hours. So we can miss things sometimes. And so it's nice if in the comments you're like, hey, what about this card? Because then at least it still exists in connection with this episode in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
I agree. It's very helpful. It's also helpful for me when I'm predicting future episodes. If you're like, hey, I would like you to talk about this kind of card as well.
Yeah, that's really
because, I have my own style and the things that I think are good, but if there's stuff that you guys want to hear about, like one of my big ones was Voya. We didn't talk about Voya because I was like, it's elves, boring.
And it turned out to be like
it is like the most popular, and it makes sense.
That
makes sense.
Yeah.
We just talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah, that helps. Just give us the feedback, and then we can, adjust accordingly. So it's great.
Sometimes you guys are right.
All right, careful. Don't tell them that. They get all uppity.
I mean, never. If you want to pick up any of the cards that we talked about today, go to cardkingdom.com/command. It's a great way to just let them know that you're a listener and that you're using our affiliate code helps us out a lot. They've got a huge selection of singles, sealed product. If you're picking up Foundations sealed, it's a great place to do it. But also, if you're building a new deck, if you're building one of the commanders we talked about in the most powerful commander episode with Jimmy, you can get all of those cards in one place and they can get shipped to your doorstep in one safe package. Feels like cracking 1 million booster packs all at once, which is really fun. Plus, they've got a great team that always takes care of you. So if something happens to go wrong, you've got a great team of people to reach out to get it resolved. Again, cardkingdom.com/command.
And then, of course, once you get your hands on those cards, you want to keep them protected. UltraPro is the game accessories brand that we trust our own collections to here at the Command Zone. If you go to ultrapro.com/command, you can find all kinds of cool products. The holidays are coming up. Yeah. It's a time of giving. It's a time of gifting. And I find it difficult to buy cards for somebody else's deck, just for the simple reason that they know their deck so much better than I do, that oftentimes, you're like, this card would be perfect. It can come off as like you're trying to tell them like they don't know how to build their deck. But also, a lot of times it's like that I considered that card or I had it in for a while and I cut it, but you don't know because, I play this deck all the time and you just play against it.
Or even lately, like, oh, I do want that card, but I like the other printing better.
Yeah, but what you can do, and what people often don't do for themselves, is like, hey, you've got that awesome, whatever deck. I can get you the Mana 8 blue deck box and playmat and sleeves that match, and be like, yeah, I know your favorite deck is a deck that has blue in it, or is a blue deck or whatever, and I'm going to get you the stuff that can kind of like outfit it and dress it all up, and that's a thing that oftentimes people will not do for themselves. So I find Ultra Pro to be a really good place to go to get gifts for people because, I can't buy cards for Jimmy's deck, but I can get him red deck boxes, and he really likes that. So ultrapro.com/command, something to think about around the holidays.
Plus, go support our Kickstarter. If you like Ultra Pro stuff, you'll like this deck box.
Speaking of holiday gifts, we are going to do our best to get these to people, by the holidays.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so the Kickstarter is going to end at the very beginning of December or the very end of November, and we're going to get everybody's addresses and try and get them shipped out. We're actually going to do it ourselves this time so that we can hopefully, because before we've hired like a third-party company because it's thousands of boxes and it tends to take a while, but we want to get people stuff by the holiday, so we're going to do our absolute best to get it there. So the Kickstarter link is in the show notes. Please support our content. Please get a really cool deck box, and thanks for watching.
If you want to know who you're supporting, here's our amazing team here at the Command Zone. It's Eric Lem, Rachel Kender, Gaurav Galati, Jamie Block, Jordan Pridgeon, Jake Boss, Josh Murphy, Manson Lung, Christopher Matista, Karina Cruz, Sebastian Salazar, Evan Limburger, Sam Waldo, and of course, Jimmy Wong. See y'all next time.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Peace.
For your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com. or ask us on Twitter at JFWong and at Josh Lee Kwai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.